Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1. The sky turned purple, the earth was cracking, turning black and rotting. The land where they had lived for so long. The tower was collapsing. We've lost. It was something that no one had dared to say. Because the moment they said it, it would become true. The 10 gods gathered together looked back on the myth they had written. Is this really the end? I never thought I'd say goodbye like this. I mean, I always knew it would end somehow, but let's just get it over with. It's already over anyway. What do you mean it's over? It's not over yet, Sun Wukong, the man with long white hair and a long staff, said. He was the main character with the name Great Sage, heaven's equal in the myth of the Rebel of Heaven. You talk big for someone who's dying. Heracles, who was wearing a lion's skin and holding a broken club, retorted to Sun Wukong's confidence. The protagonist who had led the war against the giants to victory and the greatest hero of Olympus was dying with one of his arms torn off. I'm not going to die. Do you think you can survive against those things, even if you are immortal? Heracles turned his head and looked at the beings floating in the purple sky far away. The gods of the other world. Outer gods. The despair that closed the sky and the frustration that sank into the swamp, the unborn, the foolish disaster. The beings who could kill ordinary people just by looking at them were wreaking havoc on their world. This place will be discovered soon. It may have already been discovered. Whoosh, thud, a white mass came flying from somewhere. The gods' gazes turned to the mass, then turned to the direction from which the voice had come. You're back. I thought you were dead. A man with black hair and black eyes, his messy hair cut short. Yuan walked slowly, as if he had lost his strength, and sat down on a chair made from a fallen tree. Are you alone? Heracles asked. The party that had left with him was nowhere to be seen, and Yuan had returned alone. Merlin, Asura, Vishnu, are they all dead? Yes. Yuan nodded. They're all dead. The surroundings fell silent. Silence fell. Everyone stared at Yuan. The gods who had left with Yuan never returned. They must have been devoured by the beings outside, becoming nutrients for the abyss. The silence did not last long. The gods focused their attention on the pure white lump that Yuan had tossed out. Who was that? A foolish chaos. What? The surviving gods were shocked by Yuan's answer. They had suspected that Yuan, who had returned alone, was not an ordinary guy, but his true identity was beyond their imagination. Really? That guy? Yuan nodded. I'm sure of it now. One of the outer gods. Yuan had realized a cruel truth during his fight with the foolish chaos. The inner can't defeat the outer. Inner. It was a term used to refer to beings like Yuan who belonged to the tower. And those present were beings who had climbed to the highest floors of the tower and gained divine status and divine names. But even they were no match for the gods of the abyss. They had known all along. Ever since this battle began and the gods of the abyss first appeared. Their existence was like a disaster, even to those who considered themselves gods. We can't win, an old man in the corner said. Not now. He held out his hand and a clockwork appeared on his palm. Clockwork of Chronos. Yuan looked at the old man, Chronos, and asked. Are we really going to do this? Go back to the old timeline. And start over. I would have preferred to end it here. This was our last chance. Despite his hunched back and wrinkled face, Chronos's voice was strong. Chronos was a being with the divine authority to manipulate time. The items he created were imbued with the power of time. But, I'll probably be gone in the timeline you return to. That's the only way to reverse time and distort the timeline, and it's a fair price to pay. So don't bother looking for me. Your existence will disappear. I don't know what form it will take. But I don't matter. It was a story that had already ended, so Yuan had hoped that the battle would end here. But in the end, they had lost the battle. Now, he had no choice but to go back. Then who will go? Everyone's gaze turned to Yuan. It seemed like the discussion about who would go to the past was over. Now, all that remained was Yuwon's choice. Am I the one? Yes, it was something that had been discussed since the pocket watch was first mentioned. Who would go to the past? It hadn't been decided yet, but the two most likely candidates were Yuwon and Sun Ogong. However, it seemed that something had been decided while Yuwon was away. Why me? Because you were the last to join us. And yet, you're standing here right now. It was true, Yuwon had entered the tower later than anyone else here. But he had adapted to this world faster than anyone else, climbed the tower, and was fighting alongside them. Don't forget, the beings on the upper floors are restricted when they intervene on the lower floors. In the end, the only way to change the tower is to climb from the bottom. Yes, I know, that's why there's no one else but you. Yuwon sighed and reached out his hand. The pocket watch continued to send time forward. The method of operation was imprinted on his mind the moment he held the item in his hand. Perhaps when I go to the past, our relationship won't be the same as it is now. Even if you don't recognize us, it doesn't matter. Because in that timeline, you won't know. Beat up anyone who doesn't recognize you. If that doesn't work, just kill them. Good luck, my friend. People spoke to Yuwon from all sides. It seemed like they were saying what they wanted to say, since it was goodbye. You talk a lot, really. Yuwon smiled wryly and looked at his companions. When the other gods appeared, they had no choice but to join forces. Not everyone here had been allies from the beginning. Rather, some had opposed each other, fought each other, and even tried to kill each other. But now, things were different. It was strange to think about it again. They're such disobedient bastards. Click, he was already worried. Would he be able to gather these idiots together like he did now if he went back to the past? Would he be able to fight the otherworldly beings and win this battle? Would he be able to change everything for the better? Click, the pocket watch began to turn in the opposite direction. I guess I'll have to work hard. In Yuwon's vision, countless pocket watches began to turn in reverse. Chapter 2. Buried among the countless clock gears, Yuwon slowly opened his eyes. It's not that my body returned to the past, but that time itself has been reversed. His body felt light like a deflated balloon. The stats that supported his physical body, his mana, everything had disappeared. It was a little disappointing. If he had returned to the past with the power he had, things would have been much easier. Well, that would have been much more difficult. Sending the soul itself to the past and sending the physical body to the past were problems of completely different dimensions. If the physical body was sent to the past, the problem of having the same person existing in the same time period would have to be solved, and the power required to send it across the timeline to the past would also be much greater. Perhaps even Chronos would not be able to do that. In the end, it means that I have to start over from the beginning. The feeling of returning to the past was similar to waking up after a long sleep. In order to know how far back in time he had gone, Yuwon first looked around. Puck, he felt a dull shock to his face. What the hell is this out of the blue as soon as I get back? Huh, you holding up? His blurry vision returned, and he saw a man in front of him. A fairly stout physique, a long nose, and a face that tried to look intimidating. What the heck is this? It had been so long ago that he couldn't remember right away. Then Yuwon noticed the clothes the man was wearing. Ah, that's right, Cheongsong University. The clothes the man was wearing were the tracksuits of the university Yuwon attended. Because it had been so long ago, he couldn't remember well, but when he saw the tracksuit, the fact that he was a college student came to mind as clear as day. The place where Yuwon was a gymnasium within the university. What was that guy's name? Even at this moment, he felt like he could vaguely remember. Swish, huh, the man made a bewildered expression as his fist missed. Yuwon took a step back and muttered. Was it tomorrow or today? What day is it today? If you answer quickly, I'll forget about the one you just hit me with. It wasn't a full-force punch, so it didn't hurt that much anyway. The man's expression crumpled ruthlessly in an instant. It seemed that he thought Yuwon was making fun of him. Is this kid crazy right now? What are you talking about? And you're speaking informally to me. Swish, bam, the man's eyes spun. The floor and ceiling of the gymnasium mixed like paint, and the man collapsed on the spot. Even if it's not you, my phone will tell me everything. There was no need to ask. I could feel the texture of the smartphone in my pocket, so I could find out through that. Yuwon checked the date on his smartphone and looked down at the man who had collapsed on the floor. School's probably out, isn't there anything else to do? The name of the man on the missed call log was visible. I remembered, a man named Kim Myung-hoon. He was a senior and a famous idiot in the physical education department. I was getting hit here for no reason. I really don't know why. Yoo-won was suddenly called and beaten up by Kim Myung-hoon even though the semester was over. Think about the reason yourself. You have to suffer too. The date was December 31, 2019. It was the last day of the year. And the December 31st that Yoo-won remembers was the day the first tutorial began. It came just in time. The date was perfect, not too early, not too late. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if Chronos set the time separately, but I liked it quite a bit. It was 3 p.m. There are about 9 hours left until midnight. It was a tight schedule to prepare and choose a location. It's going to be busy from today. Kim Myung-hoon regained consciousness and woke up around evening. The lights were all off, and what woke Kim Myung-hoon up in the dark gym was the vibration of his smartphone that had fallen to the floor. Ah, that's right, I had an appointment, 7 p.m. It was an evening appointment and a drinking party with friends. Damn it, Kim Myung-hoon, who recalled why he had fainted, muttered an annoyed curse. Getting hit and fainting during a junior education session. It was a stupid thing to do, getting drunk somewhere. I'll give that little punk some real education later. Just a lucky punch that came in wrong. That's what Kim Myung-hoon thought. He thought he was good enough to be recognized locally when it came to fighting, and Kim Yoo-won was one of the smaller juniors and an easy guy. Hey, let's go, let's sober up, it's a waste. Kim Myung-hoon hurriedly packed his belongings and took a taxi to Hongdae. He quickly wiped away the traces of blood from his nose and brushed off the dust on his clothes, and he was soon clean. On Thursday, December 31st, and for the next 3 days, it was a golden holiday, so Hongdae was crowded with people. There are a lot of dirty people. Hey, over here, over here. You're late, you have to pay a fine. His friends were already waiting for Kim Myung-hoon. His fellow students from 2018. They were the ones who were about to go to the military soon. Why didn't you contact me? You're an hour late, that's 10,000 won. Don't be ridiculous. Kim Myung-hoon, who had arrived at his seat, received a drink first. They had been drinking for an hour, and one of them was already quite red in the face. What's wrong? Why is this kid so depressed? Didn't you come here to relieve stress? Oh, I don't know. Give me another drink. It seemed like he needed to get a little drunk first. At Kim Myung-hoon's words, his friend gave him another drink, mixing beer and soju. As if to change the mood, his friend asked as he handed him the drink. What about Kim Yoo-won? What happened to him? At that moment, Kim Myung-hoon's hand, which was holding the drink to his mouth, stopped. Kim Myung-hoon thought for a moment and then grinned and replied. I killed him. I don't know if he went to the hospital. Hey, take it easy. That kid might commit suicide. So what? That kid doesn't have parents, right? Isn't it a relief? Yeah, well, is suicide our responsibility? If we beat him up a few times and he gets hurt, that's his responsibility. Kim Myung-hoon's mood quickly improved at his friend's responses. The atmosphere soon became noisy. The unpleasant events of the day were quickly forgotten. Anyway, I'll see him again soon and beat him up again. If that happened, this incident would be as if it had never happened. Like that, the first and second rounds. After the somek and beer, they decided to drink expensive liquor for the third round. There are a lot of dirty people. We have 3 days off. What time is it now? 11:50. It's almost 2020. As he faced the cold wind, he felt like he was sobering up a bit. As his hazy mind gradually came to life, Kim Myung-hoon dropped his finished cigarette on the floor and took a step. Hey, let's go. You're sobering up. It's a waste. Hey, isn't that Kim Yoo-won? Where, really? Kim Myung-hoon's body stiffened at the voices he heard nearby. Kim Myung-hoon turned his head, pretending to be as nonchalant as possible. Why is that bastard here? It was real. Yoo-won was standing in the middle of the crowd, holding a carrier in his hand. People passed by, avoiding Yoo-won, who was standing still. Judging from the fact that he wasn't moving, it seemed like he was waiting for someone. Seriously, this is annoying. He couldn't have been more unlucky. Of all places, he had to run into Kim Yoo-won here before he could even get his revenge. He seems fine. Yeah, who's he waiting for? What's that carrier next to him? Let's go say hi. What do you mean say hi? What are you going to do? The group was already approaching Yoo-won. You're done for, really. Kim Myung-hoon gritted his teeth at Yoo-won, recalling what had happened during the day. He had planned to step on Yoo-won for sure, even if he had to lose face in front of his friends. Hey, Kim Yoo-won. Kim Myung-hoon approached Yoo-won first. There were 6 people, including Kim Myung-hoon, on each side. When the number of people on your side was greater, your shoulders would relax and you would lose your fear. Kim Myung-hoon asked, showing his white teeth. What's going on here? 6 people surrounded one person. At the ominous atmosphere, the people crowded in the street stepped back. It seemed like a fight could break out at any moment. Instead of answering Kim Myung-hoon's question, Yoo-won checked the electronic watch on his wrist. It's almost 12 o'clock, 11 hours 57 minutes and 12 seconds. After checking the time, Yoo-won took off his wristwatch and dropped it on the floor. So enjoy the remaining 3 minutes. Thud, creak. Yoo-won opened the large carrier he had brought with him. Yoo-won continued to speak, taking out the items inside. Because after that, it's hell. They don't know what will happen from now on, what kind of world we will live in. That's why they don't know how precious and sweet these 3 minutes will be. What? That punk, what nonsense is he? Kim Myung-hoon, who was approaching Yoo-won menacingly, was startled and took a step back without realizing it. It was because of what Yoo-won had taken out of the carrier. You bastard are you crazy? The items that appeared outside the carrier were all dangerous-looking weapons. Sashimi knives and MacGyvers, camping machetes and axes. And a bag whose contents were unknown. From among them, Yoo-won put the MacGyver and the axe on his waist and gripped the sashimi knife. Hey, hurry up and apologize. How much did you hit him for him to be like this? That's right, you bastard. You're the one in the wrong. Yoo-won, you shouldn't be doing this either. No matter how angry you are. All sorts of weapons created a large circle around Yoo-won. The surroundings were bustling. Kim Myung-hoon was too scared to approach, frightened by the sashimi knife in his hand. Someone passing by called the police. 58 minutes. There wasn't much time left. Yoo-won slung the bag he took out of the carrier over his shoulder and looked around. There are enough people. Hongdae. It was one of the places in Seoul with the largest floating population that Yoo-won could remember. It used to be Anyang before. Yoo-won looked up at the sky. The clouds had stopped moving. The surroundings were noisy. No one paid any attention to the phenomenon that was happening right now. They were only making a fuss, looking at the weapons Yoo-won was holding. Now, in the midst of the commotion, Yoo-won checked the watch he had dropped on the floor. It's starting. Zing. A ringing sound rang in his ears. It wasn't just a sound that was ringing in Yoo-won's ears. Hundreds, thousands of people passing by Hongdae were all holding their ears. Some people fell down, their ears and heads ringing. Yoo-won stood there, watching the scenery around him change. Crack, clank, creak, crack, the ground split open, and bizarre-shaped plants grew up from it. Whoosh, the clouds floating above turned upside down and became black. The digital watch stopped at 0-100, 2020. 20,131st zone. Population, 12,014. It was a welcome message. 12,000 people. He hadn't been wrong to choose Hongdae. Grr. Kya. When the ringing stopped, the first thing he heard were strange cries. They're here, between the buildings. Yoo-won, with a knife in his hand, walked past Kim Myung-hoon and his gang, who were still holding their ears and heads. It's over. The tutorial will now begin. 3 minutes. Chapter 3. Groan. Amidst the ringing in his ears, he could hear a scream. Yoo-won listened to the message and walked towards the sound. Survive from the zombies. All zombies will be eliminated after 30 minutes. The mission itself wasn't much different from what Yoo-won had experienced before. If there was one difference, it was this. There's a lot of them. It was the number of zombies that started to appear everywhere in the streets. The difficulty of the tutorial varies by each district. The difficulty setting was related to the number of people, and the difficulty increased as the population of the district increased. It made sense. If there were more people to join forces, the monsters would have to be stronger, and the mission would have to be more difficult to be fair. Normally, that's how you'd think. That's bullshit. Kyok. Monster. Zombie. It's a zombie. Yoo-won saw people screaming at the sight of the zombies or backing away to get away from them. They couldn't help it. This area of Hongdae had too high of a population density compared to the size of the streets. If it was a different street, the streets would have been empty and there would have been many places to run. Plus, the number of zombies wouldn't have been that large, so the difficulty would have been much lower. There are too many people compared to the size of the street. There was no good place to run. That's why this Hongdae street would be filled with the blood of people bitten by the zombies. There was only one way at times like this. If there was no way to run, you had to fight. You couldn't survive from that many zombies just by running away. This place was already limited as a district, and there would be zombies everywhere you go. But that's the normal reaction. Yoo-won was like that too. It wasn't until after the tutorial started that he started to accept this world, adapt to it, and actively struggle to survive. You can check your status through the status window keyword. You have acquired the basic weapon, Old Sword. People held weapons like swords, hammers, and spears in their hands. It seemed like they were holding weapons that the individuals could use well. Yuan was given a sword. Clang! Yuan threw the sword on the ground. It was a piece of junk that couldn't even be called a weapon, let alone sharp. It'd be hard to even kill 2 or 3 zombies with this. It would be a different story if he used it well, but this old sword was barely any better than his bare hands, like a club made of iron. It was a worn-out weapon that could break at any moment. On the other hand, the theme of the first tutorial was none other than survival. The countless zombies would continue to appear no matter how many you killed. Kyok, don't push, get out of the way, FCK. Unfortunately, the people who were close to the zombies were already bitten or were grabbing, pulling, and pushing other people. They wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice others to survive. That's what humans were. Survive, huh? Yuan opened his bag and opened the lid of a small bottle that he had put inside. That alone won't be enough. From now on, the things that Yuan had to do weren't enough to just pass the normal tutorial. Before, it was enough to just survive, but now he had a bigger purpose. Yuan picked up other weapons instead of the old sword. And one more thing, Yuan spread the contents of the bottle he had opened onto the sashimi knife. Now, having finished his preparations, Yuan opened his eyes wide. There was no need to check his stats. He could sense the extent of his basic stats with his body. Let's go. Whoosh. Yuan charged into the oncoming horde of zombies. Zombies were slow and weak, but they were known for their insensitivity to pain and tenacious vitality. They wouldn't die from ordinary force. Not many people were able to kill zombies in the first tutorial. However, splat, the first zombie has been killed in the area. 100 points have been acquired. Experience has increased significantly. Level has increased. Strength has increased by 1. Agility has increased by 1. Health has increased by 1. The sashimi knife in Yuan's hand beheaded the zombie with ease. Good. A smile spread across Yuan's lips. It was worth moving quickly. The reward for hunting the first zombie was quite large for the effort. 100 points was hard to come by at the beginning of the tutorial, and the increased stats that came with leveling up would be a great strength. His arms and legs felt stronger. That was the power of strength. The zombies seemed slower and his body felt lighter. That was the power of agility. Vitality flowed through his body, and his breathing became more stable. That was the power of health. Yuan continued to move. Slash. Stab. 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 Swish. Wielding the sashimi knife, Yuan quickly cut down the zombies. Level has increased. Leveling up was quick in the beginning. Of course, it was also because Yuan's speed in cutting off the zombies' heads was that fast. A series of pleasant messages. This is great. Yuan looked at the zombies scattered all around him and smiled. This was the reason why Yuan had chosen Hongdae as the location for the first tutorial. The number of zombies that appeared varied depending on the number of people prepared in each area. And that would continue to be the case until the tutorial moved on to the next area. Seeing Yuan cutting down dozens of zombies by himself, people's reactions began to change one by one. Hey, are the zombies not that strong? Maybe I can do it. There are fearless people everywhere. Some of those who witnessed Yuan slaughtering the zombies began to join the fight one by one. The rewards for the first tutorial were important. Perhaps some of those fast-moving people would survive and climb to the upper floors of the tower. Of course, it won't be easy. What are these things? Why won't they die? No matter how many times they cut off their heads, the zombies didn't die easily. In the first place, it wasn't easy to cut off the zombies' heads with a worn-out knife. Seeing the zombies that wouldn't die, many of the people who panicked were bitten by the zombies. The poison of the zombies must be lethal to the participants of the first tutorial. Creak. The feeling of the knife tip hitting the zombie's head was quite heavy. It felt like the blade had become duller than before. But that wasn't the reason. Tisk. Bang. Yuan clicked his tongue and kicked the zombie away with his foot. It seemed like the effect had worn off. Swish. Yuan hurriedly opened his bag and pulled out the next bottle. Clang. Slash. The contents of the bottle that shattered against the blade of the knife wears meard on the blade once more. Astringentant sanguiniador irritated Wuan's nose. It definitely works. Wuan remembered the word Sofako or Kurwo had entered the tower a long time ago, right when he had just passed the tutorial. Unlike you, I have no talent. No, not just compared to you, but compared to others as well. But you still survived. I was lucky. I discovered something amazing in the first tutorial. The first, wasn't that just about surviving against zombies? Do you know what I did? Why are you suddenly talking about work? What was your occupation, sir? The middle-aged man he had met on the first floor of the tower had been quite lucky. Perhaps that man was now hunting zombies with ease, unlike others. Saltern management. Those zombie bastards in the first tutorial. Salt is their weakness. Snap. The head of the zombie hanging from the tip of the sashimi knife was easily cut off. It was thanks to the salt water that Wuhan had sprinkled just moments ago. 100 zombies have been defeated in 10 minutes. An incredible achievement has been made in the tutorial. 3 free stat points have been acquired. Free stat points will be randomly calculated once the tutorial ends. Wuhan's eyes sparkled. This was an unexpected reward for Wuhan. Could you even get free stat points in the tutorial? Free stat points were valuable rewards. While leveling up would randomly increase stats, the advantage of free stat points was that you could increase the stat you wanted. Moreover, while it became harder to level up as you progressed, free stat points acquired like this were unrelated to level. Should I save them? Mana would not be unlocked at this point. Mana would be unlocked from the middle of the tutorial onwards. The most efficient stat, and the most difficult stat to increase, was mana. However, rather than saving them, it might be better to increase a stat now to gain efficiency. After contemplating for a moment, Wuhan made a decision. I'll put them on hold for now. After all, investing free stat points in defeating zombies was a waste in the long run. Above all, what Wuhan was about to do from now on was not simply hunting by cutting and stabbing. 10 minutes. From now on, zombies would start pouring out in earnest. In that case, Wuhan should start moving diligently. A suitable place. Wuhan looked around as he cut down the zombies and cleared a path. A street where people and zombies were mixed together in chaos. Wuhan's gaze, which had been scanning the street, turned to one side. Over there. Crack. Kim Myung-hoon swung the old sword in his hand. The zombie's head was not cut off right away. This time as well, it was the same old story. Damn it, why isn't it working? He didn't know why. Wuhan, who had first charged towards the zombies, had cut down the zombies with great ease. On the other hand, the swords of the others, including himself, had to be swung several times to barely kill one. Is it because the sword is dull? Wuhan's sword was different from this. Instead of a sword with worn-out teeth, he had used a sashimi knife and a machete that he happened to have. Damn it, if only I had weapons like that. Groan. The zombie whose head was half cut opened its mouth and wailed. A foul stench stung his nose. Kim Myung-hoon was startled and lifted his foot to kick the zombie in the chest. Thud. The zombie that fell to the ground stood up right away as if it didn't feel any pain. Kim Myung-hoon looked at the zombie as if it was disgusting. Myung-hoon, why did they keep increasing in number? As they continued to move, their stamina gradually decreased, and their friends approached them and spoke. Kim Myung-hoon bit his lip tightly. He knew it too. The numbers aren't decreasing. Instead, they're increasing. There was no way to handle this number. Gruon. Screech. Zombies surrounded them from all sides. There was no way to escape, and there wasn't enough stamina left to block them. At this rate, they would die without being able to move. Block those guys. Survive in this situation. How on earth? The method was heard right next to him. Yuan. Where did Yuan go? There was only one way to survive in the besieged yard. Kim Yuan. He just had to get his help. Just now, Yuan's skill in slicing the zombies like tofu was that great. He's not here. Damn it, where did that punk go? Oh, he's coming. Gruon. The zombies narrowed the encirclement. Kim Myung-hoon gritted his teeth and swung his sword. That moment, clang, Kim Myung-hoon's eyes opened wide. It was because of the pieces of the sword that had fallen to the floor. The sword he was swinging at the zombies had broken. What the hell? The sword was already dull. However, the sword that had barely protected his body as a blunt weapon had broken. He no longer had the means to protect himself from the zombies. Crunch. Before he knew it, a zombie that had approached right before his nose opened its mouth towards Kim Myung-hoon. A foul stench that stung his nose. Rotten teeth approaching from all sides. The moment he screamed while looking at the zombies approaching like that. Aha! Something was strange. The zombies suddenly stopped moving. What is it? Why did these punks suddenly? The promised time hadn't passed yet. There was no particular reason for the zombies to stop. That wasn't the end of the strange things. Hiss. Groan. Gruon. Screech. The zombies writhed in pain as if their bodies were being burned. They were the ones whose arms and legs had been cut off, and whose bones had been broken, but they were still intact. However, those guys writhed in pain as if their bodies were burning, and even fell to the floor one by one. Thud, hiss, the rotten flesh of the zombies melted away. As if hydrochloric acid had been poured on them. What the hell is suddenly? What's falling? What? Kim Myung-hoon looked up at the sound of a voice coming from next to him. He hadn't realized it because the situation was so urgent, but something was falling from the sky. Kim Myung-hoon held out his hand to receive it. It was a familiar crystal. He extended his hand forward with the thought that it couldn't be, and took a bite. Salty. It tasted very familiar. Salt. Kim Myung-hoon looked up again. Salt was raining down from the sky. Chapter 4. Yeah, yeah. From below, the cries of the zombies echoed. The sight of the zombies writhing around, clutching their heads and bodies, was quite unfamiliar. Originally, they were guys who wouldn't even scream even if all their limbs were cut off and stabbed several times. Level has risen. Level has risen. Level. Messages rang out one after another. Yuan muttered as he took out the next bag of salt and sprinkled it. Is this the last one? 20 minutes had passed, when the zombies were at their peak. Yuan climbed up to the top of the building with the salt he had prepared in his bag beforehand. Like that, Yuan jumped between buildings and sprinkled salt over the horde of zombies. Splash! The last bag of salt scattered into the air. The salt particles spread far and wide. It soon poured down like rain over the heads of the zombie horde. Once again, the heads and bodies of the zombies melted away. Level up messages poured in one after another. A pleasant smile spread across Yuan's lips once more. Good. Yuan didn't even know how many he had killed this way. It must have been at least 1,000. His question was soon answered. Tutorial 1 has ended. Survivors. 4,077. Rewards will be given for targets eliminated. Enemies eliminated. 1,427. You have eliminated the most enemies. 500 points have been acquired. An unbelievable achievement has been accomplished. 1,000 points have been acquired. 1,427 points have been given. Additional random stat points have been acquired. Strength has increased by 1. Health has increased by 2. 1 free stat point has been acquired. Tutorial 2 will begin in 10 minutes. They died a lot. Yuan clicked his tongue after checking the number of survivors. The initial number of people in the Hongdae area was about 12,000, so 8,000 people died in this area alone. Well, 4,000 is a lot. In Tutorial 1, usually more than 80% of people die. Especially in areas with a large number of zombies like Hongdae, there were often places with no survivors at all. Considering that, 4,000 survivors was quite a lot. I killed a lot too. 1,427, that was the number of zombies Yuan had killed. If he had just slashed them with his sword, it would have been absolutely impossible to cut down so many zombies in 30 minutes. 100 for the first kill reward, 500 for killing the most enemies, 1,000 for the unbelievable achievement, and 1,400 at 1 point per kill. It was a total of over 3,000 points. Points that were absolutely impossible to obtain in Tutorial 1. Most of the tutorial participants usually started with 1 to 10 points after catching 1 or 2 zombies, or 10 at most. I started with 7 points before. Yuan also remembered that he had learned some exercise and had a strong body, so he had hunted quite a few zombies. But compared to that time, this was a ridiculous starting point. Name: Kim Yuan. Level: 16. Strength: 23. Agility: 20. Health: 24. Perception: 21. Points in possession: 3,027. Free stat points: 4. Level 16. The sum of his stats was 88. And when combined with his free stat points, it was a whopping 92 stats. It's too much to get in Tutorial 1. The experience points from the zombies weren't that great. No matter how many of them he killed, the level he could raise in Tutorial 1 was limited to around 3 to 4. The next tutorial is probably. As Yuan was about to stand up to move. Hello, everyone, an unusually cheerful voice rang out of place with the situation. At the sound of the voice ringing in their ears, the bodies of the people who had been moving busily below froze. And so did Yuan. Who is it? What, did you hear it too? I heard it too. Where is it? Where are you? The large oval-shaped safe zone was divided into several colors. The center was purple, and the outermost edge was red. The man's voice was not loud, but it was clear to everyone's ears. It was different from the system message. Unlike the message, which had no pitch or tone, this voice sounded like a human's. Yu-won looked up, recognizing the owner of the voice. An errand boy. This voice was that of the errand boy of the administrator who was running the tutorial. Although he was not the real administrator who managed a floor, but just an errand boy of the administrator who was in charge of one of the tens of thousands of zones, he would be a transcendent being at this point. He's not supposed to appear in the second tutorial. That's probably why he didn't show his face. The first time the errand boy appeared was originally at the beginning of the third tutorial. Congratulations on your survival. There are a lot of survivors here. It's so overwhelming. The purpose of the first tutorial was twofold. To filter out those who were not qualified to move on to the next tutorial and to verify that they were qualified. However, in this Hongdae, many more people survived than the administrator had originally intended. There was one reason. It must be because of me. Yu-won was the first to lead the crowd psychology by slaughtering the zombies. Everyone has a different way of overcoming fear. However, once the first person overcame their fear, people started fighting. The second was the mass slaughter of zombies due to salt. At least there will be a lot of survivors where I killed the zombies. Is that why? The errand boy's voice was strangely excited. It was as if he had found something interesting to watch. I have something to tell you all. Originally, I was going to tell you after the second tutorial was over, but this time is an exception. There was someone who reached the benchmark too quickly. One by one, people had expressions of hope at the errand boy's words. I have something to tell you. What's the news? What is it? See, can we go home now? Of course, people had only one wish. To go home. No one wanted to run away from zombies, fight, or watch people die. Except for psychos who had a few screws loose. I'll tell you what. How to use points. Come on, applause. He pretended to sound cheerful, but the atmosphere around him was not. It was not a way to get home. People's disappointment was indescribable just by that one fact. Of course, there were some who listened to the errand boy's words even then. Usually, such people survive. They were the type who adapted quickly. There are two main ways to use points. First, using the shop. This is really great. I'm sure you'll find things you never imagined. Shop. It didn't seem like much when you just heard the word. However, the shop that the errand boy was talking about played a very important role in this world. It's not for nothing that they say you can become a god if you have points. Level and points. From now on, it was a fight between these two. The other way to use it is currency. You guys like money, don't you? You can hand over or receive points from each other through a handshake. Points can be used to access the shop. In addition, you can transfer those points to others to get something else in return or to get cooperation. Literally, points were the currency of this world, and they were power and authority. Time's up. The break was sweet, right? That's all for the announcement. From now on. Starting the second tutorial, it's time to struggle again. With those words, the errand boy's speech ended. It was the beginning of the second tutorial. A safe zone is created in the center of the zone. Enter the safe zone. 100 points will be paid once every 3 hours. Safe zone. Is that it? People flocked to the circle that had appeared on the floor. The elongated oval safe zone was divided into various colors. The center was purple, and the outermost edge was red. Hey, let's go. Fuck, really, what the hell is this? What about Chanyo? I don't know. He might be dead. Kim Myung-hoon and his group began to move towards the safe zone while chatting. Fortunately, the safe zone was quite close. It seemed that the place where they were was close to the center of the zone. Kim Myung-hoon looked around twice. What are you looking for? No, it's nothing. Now that I think about it, I don't see Yuan anywhere. People were gathering in the safe zone. Of course, it wasn't strange that he couldn't see someone in a crowd of thousands. He's not dead, is he? No way. Would that punk die? Well, he seemed like some kind of monster when I saw him fighting earlier. Is he good with a sword? Yuan's abilities were clearly outstanding. Knowing that fact, Kim Myung-hoon and the others looked for Yuan. They thought that they would be safe if they were with him. At that moment, Kim Myung-hoon's eyes caught sight of Yuan passing through the crowd of people in the distance. After a moment's hesitation, Kim Myung-hoon raised his hand and waved it. Hey, Kim Yuan. Yuan stopped walking when he heard someone calling him and looked back. Kim Myung-hoon, where are you going? Not that way. Didn't you hear that it's a circle? Kim Myung-hoon spoke in a friendly voice, unlike before. He had decided that it would do him no good to pick a fight with Yuan, especially now. I hate to admit it, but right now, that punk's side is the safest. Fortunately, Yuan didn't seem too upset. Even this guy knows that it would do him no good to get angry with me in this situation. It would be good for Yuan to have a team. 2 is better than 1, and 3 is better than 2, so having more people would increase their chances of survival. If I just reach out to him first. I know, huh. I have somewhere I need to go. Yuan said that as he patted Kim Myung-hoon on the shoulder. And then, if you want to live, don't try to stick to others, go over there and wait quietly. And don't cause trouble. What? This son of a... Yuan didn't seem to care about what Kim Myung-hoon said and walked straight ahead. Yuan's steps were heading in a direction other than the safe zone. He felt conflicted. Should he let Yuan go? But being with that guy seems like the safest thing to do. Kim Myung-hoon hesitated for a moment as he watched Yuan walk away, then turned and headed towards the safe zone. Well, surely it can't be safer than the safe zone. Kim Myung-hoon entered the nearby safe zone. And that moment. Thud, ack, the man following behind Kim Myung-hoon hit his head on something and staggered back. What is it? It's blocked. Didn't it say to go in here? Bang, bang, bang. Those who couldn't enter the safe zone pounded on the invisible wall. And around that time, words appeared on the wall surrounding the safe zone. Capacity, 2038 2038. 2038. It was exactly half of the people who had survived the first tutorial. Kim Myung-hoon, who had entered the safe zone almost last, looked outside the wall that had suddenly appeared. The safe zone had appeared as the second tutorial began. And that safe zone had a limited capacity. That meant, over there, it's a monster. Of course, the outside of the safe zone was dangerous. What is this og? Crack, beep, beep, beep. Kim Myung-hoon trembled at the pandemonium that unfolded outside the safe zone. Squirm, click, clack, numerous bugs with long snouts extended their heads above the ground and were chewing on people. Chapter 5. Og, save me. Yuan's steps quickened at the sound of screams coming from afar. It started. The second tutorial was a stage that granted 100 points per hour. It sounded like a pretty decent mission, just hanging out and earning points. However, since the tutorial was a gateway to select those who would enter the tower, it wasn't that easy. Poof, creak, creak, a strange, bone-chilling cry came from the ground. It was the result of him slamming the sashimi knife he was holding into the ground. You have slain your first earthworm. 300 points have been given. 2 random stat points have been given. Strength has increased by 1. Agility has increased by 1. Messages that made him feel good. As expected, the tutorial was generous with its rewards, as it helped those who met the criteria to enter the tower grow. After checking the message, Yuan looked down at the worm that had just emerged from the ground. Earthworm. A worm with a giant mouth and sharp teeth. At first glance, it looked like a giant earthworm. If I go outside the safe zone, I'll become their target. That was exactly what the safe zone meant. A zone safe from earthworms. And Yuan was right outside that zone. Thud, thud. Yuan walked down the stairs. He focused his mind and closed his eyes. They can't see me anyway. Earthworms hunt for food by coming up from the ground. So, it was pointless to walk around with his eyes open. When he closed his eyes, his senses that relied on sight became sharper. He had no choice but to rely on his hearing, sense of touch, and instincts that transcended his 5 senses. Squirm. Yuan lifted his foot. Whoosh. Kaya. Splash. The head of an earthworm that had opened its mouth wide and came up from the ground was crushed. It was the result of him crushing the earthworm's head with perfect timing. Yuan swung the sashimi knife in his hand. Swish. Level up. Strength has increased by 1. Agility has increased by 1. Sense has increased by 1. The earthworm's head was cut off and its life ended. He had only caught 2, but his level had gone up. It seemed like he hadn't had much experience left to level up. Of course, even considering that, the experience was pretty good. It couldn't be helped. In the first place, earthworms weren't the type of monsters that appeared in this second tutorial. Furthermore, unlike zombies, earthworms didn't have much vitality. The only thing that made them dangerous was the fact that they were in places you couldn't see. If you do well in the second tutorial, you can earn both experience and points. Thud. Yuan continued to go down the stairs. The stairs continued quite deep. Earthworms live underground. They make their own caves and make their homes in them. Yuan opened his eyes. Then he read the words written nearby. Hunjik University Station. A subway station. It was the largest underground floor in the place where Yuan was doing the tutorial. Earthworms don't breathe underground, but they can hold their breath for a long time. That's why a wide territory wasn't a choice for them, but a necessity. So, Yuan slowly opened his closed eyes. Swish, she. Click, clack, they're all gathered in the widest underground area. He didn't need to close his eyes anymore. Earthworms filled his vision. Now, he had to watch the ground, not his feet. Hidden dungeon, Hunjik University Station, has been discovered. 100 points have been acquired. Bingo. This was no longer the Hunjik University Station that Yuan knew. It was the earthworms, treasure trove, prepared to catch those who couldn't enter the safe zone above. In other words, it had become a dungeon. She. Click, clack, the earthworms that had found Yuan squirmed and approached him. They were ridiculous. They were originally creatures that hid underground and waited for their prey, but they had forgotten their own identity. It seemed like they were in a hurry because they saw food right in front of them. Crash, thud, swoosh, he cut down the earthworms that were approaching him, revealing their teeth, and then crushed their bodies with his feet. Experience points came pouring in. I'm lucky. The existence of the hidden dungeon was merely a guess on Yuan's part. Earthworms were nothing more than bugs in the tower, barely worthy of being called monsters. However, even such creatures became threatening monsters in the tutorial, especially since they hid underground, which was extremely dangerous for those who didn't have proper skills or stats yet. I'm getting a decent amount of experience points thanks to this. Swish, Yuan cut down another earthworm that approached him. The earthworms running at him were no longer a threat. They were just slightly larger bugs with teeth. Now that I've found a honey hole, hunting shouldn't be too hard. Just when he thought that, thud, rumble, a marble dropped out of the mouth of an earthworm that Yuan had killed. Huh, Yuan picked up the marble that rolled on the floor. What's this? The unexpected harvest made Yuan's lips curl up. I can get this in the second tutorial too. It was interesting. As far as Yuan knew, no one had hunted earthworms in the second tutorial, so this information had remained unknown. Yuan put the marble in his pocket. He now had another reason to work harder. I'm level 17 now. Yuan had a separate goal for the second tutorial. And he figured out the minimum requirements for it. First, I need to get to level 20. Yuan walked towards the adorable lumps of experience points in front of him. Time passed slowly. There was nothing to do. The people inside the safe zone were closing their eyes, looking away from the outside. The outside of the safe zone was like hell. There were people's flesh scattered around, and there were bugs chewing on the remaining flesh. I can't even catch a single cockroach. I'd rather bite my tongue off than get eaten by those things. They won't just suddenly come in, right? Surely not, this place is safe. Even though there were 2,000 people, their voices weren't very loud. It was because they felt like bugs would pop out from under their feet if they made a little more noise. The safe zone was quiet. It was obvious that people were careful about even letting out a single word. More time passed like that. 3 hours have passed. 100 points have been acquired. Additional points came in with the message. Oh, points. Is this like money? Is 100 points a lot? Kim Ming-hoon and the others became interested in the points as well. With points, they could use items from the shop. They had only gotten 2 or 3 points so far, but with 100 points, they could afford at least a few things. Just then, the red zone will be deactivated. Limit, 1,867 1,500ths. If the limit is exceeded, people will be randomly expelled outside the safe zone. With the message, some people's bodies started to move. Screech. What? And no. Screech. An invisible force dragged people outside. The red line on the edge of the safe zone on the floor disappeared. It was no longer safe there. More bugs poked their heads out in that spot. Crack, crunch, og. The people who had been dragged outside and the people who had been relaxing at the edge were attacked. There was nowhere to escape. No matter how far or fast they ran, they would just get eaten by the bugs that kept popping out from the ground. This is crazy. Was this going to shrink? I thought it might. They had figured that the color on the floor must mean something. Some of them had thought that the safe zone might shrink over time. And Kim Ming-hoon had also thought the same. But how far is it going to shrink? The innermost part was purple. And the outermost part was red. How many people can fit in the innermost part? Kim Ming-hoon checked the remaining time. Remaining time, 2 hours 57 minutes and 11 seconds. 2 hours and 57 minutes. Maybe after all that time. Get out of the way. I'll go in. Get the FCK out of my way. Do you want to die? Do you want to die by my hand first? Get out of the way. Why are you blocking the way? In an instant, the surroundings became pandemonium. Kim Myung-hoon's head rolled quickly. That moment. Everyone be quiet. Kim Myung-hoon rose from his seat and shouted. For a brief moment, silence fell. Kim Myung-hoon hurriedly opened his mouth, calming his rapidly beating heart. From now on, we will. The line dividing orange and yellow. Kim Myung-hoon, who was looking at the line, continued speaking. We need to decide who will die in my place. Gulp. It was a cruel statement. But it couldn't be helped. We can't all be inside. If that happened, someone would be randomly thrown outside like just now. So, I will. Kim Myung-hoon pointed to an elderly man who was rarely seen in Hongdae Street, who was standing closest to him. I will kill this grandfather. I have to kill someone so that I can live. That was the essence of the second tutorial. Quagjik. The axe struck down on the earthworm's head. The earthworm, which had been rushing forward, lost strength as its head was split by the axe and collapsed to the floor. Puruk. Shu Aak. Yu-won turned his body and swung the machete he was holding in his other hand. Simultaneously, the heads of the two earthworms that were rushing from behind were cut off. Level up. Agility increased by 1. Health increased by 1. Perception increased by 1. Level 20 achieved. New stat, mana, is unlocked. Along with the level up, the message Yu-won had been waiting for rang out. Finally, Yu-won exhaled sharply. No matter how much his health stat had increased, he was bound to get tired after moving for nearly 3 hours. Fortunately, his health had increased along with his level up, and a new stat had been unlocked, so his body felt much lighter than before. Thud, thud, digururu. Another bead fell to the floor. Yu-won picked up the bead and put it back in his bag. The bag, filled with beads, had become quite heavy. Name, Kim Yu-won. Level, 20. Strength, 28. Agility, 26. Health, 27. Perception, 24. Mana, 13. Available points, 3,527. Free stat points, 5. His stats had changed quite a bit compared to before. Most of his stats were in the mid-20s, and he still had all the stat points he had earned as rewards. Plus, a new stat had been unlocked upon reaching level 20. Yu-won's stats had already far surpassed what could be achieved in the second tutorial. 3 random stat points as a reward for hunting earthworms. 1 free stat point. It wasn't a bad reward. But it was slightly below his expectations. It will be difficult to expect a bigger reward until I catch that guy. Yu-won used the free stat points he had been saving. Distributing free stat points. Mana increased by 5. He invested all the free stat points he had been saving as rewards into mana. For others, it would take a lot of effort to find out what this mana stat was. But Yu-won knew. Of the 5 stats, there was no stat more important than mana. Mana, 18, not bad. Yu-won, who had been closing his eyes for a moment, nodded at the mana flowing through his body. Yu-won's mana stat had started at 13 from the beginning. As he later found out, a mana stat of 13 was incredibly high. Untalented people usually start with a stat of around 5 or 6, and even talented people start with a stat of around 9 or 11. And the very few people who start with a stat of 12 are said to have received the tower's blessing. And Yu-won, who had started at 13, had already reached a mana stat of 18. Look here, Yu-won looked around at the area where the earthworms had all died. Are you watching? Words spoken into the void. And then, after a moment. How did you know? A finger-sized Pierrot, the administrator's errand boy, appeared before Yu-won's eyes. Chapter 6. Woo-yun shrugged at the appearance of the errand boy. I stand out a bit. The other side must be bored, right? In the case of the safe zone, there was nothing special except for the massacre that took place once every 3 hours. Of course, for the errand boy, even that would be an interesting spectacle, but it would be himself who would be of greater interest to them. Yes, well, thank you. Thanks to you, the boring work has become a little more fun. But have you really already reached level 20? I was lucky. Luck the people who say that are the scariest. The errand boy chuckled as he said that. Of all the tutorial courses, the second tutorial was the most boring mission from the errand boy's point of view. But why did you call me? Shop. Ah, are you going to buy items? No, Woo-yun shook his head. I want to buy skills. Skills? The errand boy looked surprised. He grinned and turned on the store. You're probably the first person to buy skills in the second tutorial. Skills referred to the countless abilities that existed in the tower. And the minimum requirement to use that skill was the opening of magic power. In other words, it was to reach level 20. Countless lists appeared before Wu Yun's eyes. There was nothing that was not for sale in the store. The most basic items were crude weapons and equipment that could be purchased for around 100 to 200 points. The items that could be called proper items were over 500 points. And among them, here it is. As he went through the countless lists, skills came into view. The minimum was 1,000 points. Among them, the expensive skills went up to 100,000 points. Are all the skills here? Are there no more? The skills that you can get in the tutorial are all there. Why, is there anything you're looking for? No, nothing in particular. Simply standing out and knowing all of the items in the tower were different matters. It was not good to draw the attention of the errand boy. If he were to find out that he knew about the tutorial and the information of the tower, the difficulty of the tutorial itself might change. I'll take this. Wu Yun chose one skill. 2,000 points have been consumed. You have acquired the monkey's eye. Points in possession, 1527p. Wu Yun's eyes turned yellow. The errand boy, who saw the change in the choice, looked puzzled. Monkey's eye, that's not a very good skill, is it? The name is cool. The errand boy had a strange look on his face. He seemed to have lost interest. That was inevitable. Unlike what Wu Yun said, Monkey's Eye had a name that was not cool, and the usefulness of the skill was not that great either. Above all, it was a skill that was too difficult for the tutorial participants who had not yet entered the tower to handle. Soon, Wu Yun chose another skill. Next is this. 1,500 points have been consumed. You have acquired the lower magic sword. Points in possession, 27. The errand boy nodded. That's a good choice. Magic sword is a pretty useful skill that fills the lack of attack power of the early tutorial participants. It was true. In fact, Wu Yun chose the skill for that reason. This is cheap too. He didn't bother using the remaining points. As Wu Yun turned around, the errand boy smiled and said, "Then have a good time. I have high expectations." Wu Yun paused for a moment at those words and then moved. He has high expectations. Knowing what that meant, Wu Yun looked in the direction where the errand boy had disappeared. Special care target. Participants who showed particularly conspicuous behavior in the tutorial area. They were there to monitor and observe whether the participants were committing any irregularities. I don't care. The fact that he had been able to come this far in the second tutorial was entirely due to Wu Yun's ability. There would be no link to the tower, rankers, or other errand boys who had attempted irregularities. If there was anything, it was just one regression. Regression was a great merit. For someone with future knowledge, information, and experience, the existing tutorial would feel easy regardless of the presence or absence of stats. However, he did not have to worry about that part. The administrator wouldn't know. The pocket watch was an item created by Kronos, Mimir, and Odin. They were beings who had fought against the outer gods, who had led the tower to destruction. Furthermore, Kronos, the key figure who created the item, had disappeared from existence at this point in time as a penalty for the pocket watch. Perhaps even if a real administrator came, not just a lower-level errand boy, they would not be able to notice the existence of the item. Phew, Yuan let out a long breath. Magic stat and 2 skills. The minimum requirements to obtain from the second tutorial were met. Monkey's Eye, hash rank, F, hash proficiency, 0.00%. Hash the eye of a monkey from the peroxide forest. Hash when activated, it expands the field of vision and enhances the 5 senses. Lower grade magic sword, hash rank, F, hash proficiency, 0.00%. Hash a sword imbued with magic power. It can become an excellent sword depending on its use. Both skills had simple descriptions. The magic sword was a skill that could be utilized in various ways depending on the value of the magic stat and how it was controlled. It was a pretty useful skill to use in the tutorial in the lower floors of the tower. On the other hand, Monkey's Eye was a skill that was difficult to tell where it should be used just from the description. They sell this well. Even Yuan, who had just acquired the skill, felt burdened by the price of 2,000 points. Nevertheless, Yuan chose Monkey's Eye before any other skill. Yuan activated the skill. His 5 senses expanded, and he could see areas that were previously invisible. Sounds, movements, and even the air that touched his skin. Everything was different. It wasn't a bad skill. The more skills, the better. There was no such thing as a bad skill to have. But if that's all there is to it, it's not worth the points. It couldn't be helped, though. He had to use this skill consistently from now on to increase its proficiency. So this is that guy's eye. Remaining time, 0 hours 29 minutes and 58 seconds. Yuan checked the remaining time. There were about 30 minutes left until the next orange safe zone disappeared. There's enough time. As his lost magic returned, he felt like he could fly. Although it was only a tiny fraction of the magic power he had before, there was a clear difference between having none and having even a little. Screech, screech, bang, thud. As he took a few more steps into the subway station, more earthworms appeared. The earthworm horde was much larger than before. It was as if he was looking at a den of worms. Screech. A faint blue light gathered on the machete in his hand. It was the effect of the newly acquired skill, Magic Sword. Yuan walked through the earthworms. All around him were wriggling worms. I knew you'd be here. Screech, screech, creak, crunch, crunch. A giant worm. It was much larger than the other earthworms. Its body was 2 meters thick and almost 15 meters long. It was eating a human torso. It was prey that the other earthworms had hunted on the surface. Mamworm, the mother of earthworms. It laid countless eggs, and the earthworms that hatched from those eggs hunted for the mamworm. It was the boss of this dungeon in the second tutorial. Thud, thud, kya. The earthworms all around screamed at Yuan. Just by looking, there were about 200 or 300 of them. The wriggling earthworms were not that threatening, but there were so many of them. There was barely any room to stand around him because of the earthworms. I don't have time to deal with all of these. Thwack. Yuan leapt into the air. As he landed, he slashed at the earthworms and ran straight towards the mamworm. Thud, crash. I'll take care of the mamworm in one go. The machete imbued with magic power easily cut through the worms that rushed in. And fortunately, the mamworm was a creature that was strongly attached to its young. Kyak, thud, the mamworm's giant body moved. Ironically, its rage crushed even its own young. Yuan chuckled as he slashed at the worms. What an idiot. The speed of the mamworm, wriggling towards him, was unusual. The speed of the mammon approaching while wriggling was unusual. The giant mammon's teeth, wriggling with its massive size as it approached, rushed towards Wu Jin in one breath. Quagjik. The teeth made a gruesome sound as they clashed. Yoruk. There was nothing for the teeth to chew on. The moment the mammon let out a sound of bewilderment. Quagjik. Yak. The mammon screamed. It was because of the pain felt right next to its head. Thank you for coming first. Swish, thud, 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 thud. Wu Jin took turns stabbing with his axe and jungle machete. Like that, as if he were hiking, Wu Jin quickly climbed onto the mammon's body. Yeah, the mammon's thrashing became intense. The guy, who realized that Wu Jin had climbed on top of him, immediately turned his body upside down. Kung, the mammon exposed its stomach. At that moment, Wu Jin's jungle machete struck the guy's stomach. Kukwik. Blood fountained from the mammon's slashed flesh. Keying. The blue light, embedded in the jungle machete and axe, shone brightly. Now was the chance while the guy was flipping his stomach. Wu Jin mercilessly brandished the weapon in his hand. Pook, thud, pawaik. The mammon's stomach was cut, torn, and burst open. Kyak. The mammon's agonizing cry. The moment the mammon's head, writhing in pain, moved and bared its teeth at Wu Jin again. Kya. Quagjik. Magic was imbued in Wu Jin's axe, and it split the mammon's approaching head in half. Thud. Remaining time. 0 hours 1 minute and 12 seconds. There wasn't much time left. Kim Myung-hoon's eyes fell upon the old man he had sent outside. Damn it, it can't be helped. He had a minimum of conscience as a human being. He couldn't help but feel something as he looked at the old man who had been pointed out to him and was now outside. Please save me. This isn't right. How could you knowing that you'd die? As time approached, the resentment of those who had been pushed outside grew. Kim Myung-hoon bit his lip once and shouted, "Shut up." At his murderous glare and shout, those who were trying to sneak back inside flinched. Kim Myung-hoon reached out with the knife he had bought from the store for 100 points and said, "Let's not do this, guys. We promised, didn't we?" Everyone agreed. Who agreed? Who? That's right, we, the majority, everyone except you guys. Kim Myung-hoon thrust the knife forward. At that, the man who was trying to enter the yellow color flinched and stepped back. "So if you come in, we'll kill you. Got it?" At those words, everyone inside the yellow nodded. There was nothing to be done about the difference in numbers. In the end, it was one of two. Either die at the hands of those outside the yellow line or die here at the hands of monsters. 0 hours 0 minutes and 30 seconds. The old man closed his eyes. Now, in just 30 more seconds, monsters would rise from the ground and devour his body. 0 hours 0 minutes and 17 seconds. Ka thud, ka thud. Worms appeared outside the orange safety zone. They knew too, that in just a little while, this safe zone would disappear, and new prey would appear. B, bugs, G, get away. Those who couldn't get into the safety zone screamed. Time, it all passed. 0 hours 0 minutes and 5 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 4 seconds. 0 hours 0 minutes and 3 seconds. Opening square bracket closing square bracket. 0 hours 0 minutes and 3 seconds. Time all. Time. Those who had kept their eyes tightly shut slowly opened them. Time wasn't passing anymore. The ground, which had been painted orange, didn't disappear like before. Those inside the yellow safety zone had also checked the time. Kim Myung-hoon made a bewildered expression at the system that had suddenly changed. What the hell happened? It was then, the color of the safety zone on the floor had all turned purple. You have passed tutorial 2. The safe zone will no longer shrink. 600 points have been acquired. 15 hours remaining until the end of tutorial 2. Chapter 7. Yuan squatted down on the body of the mother worm. Around him, there were corpses of worms. This was the result of fighting the worms for over an hour without rest. Wow, you really caught them all. A voice was heard. It was the voice of the errand boy. Yuan took out the medicine he had brought in his pocket and applied it to his body before throwing it back. You must have suffered a lot. Hundreds of worms. No matter how low level they were with the mother worm. Even for Yuan, he couldn't avoid getting hurt in order to hunt them all. Should I heal you? Is that one of the rewards? Yes, then I don't mind. If I just raise my stamina, I'll get better soon. Yuan's answer made the errand boy look regretful. It seemed that he had planned to use this as an excuse to reduce the reward that Yuan would receive. It took a long time. After the fight, Yuan had been waiting in this place for over 30 minutes. During that time, Yuan had applied medicine to his body and recovered his stamina. He thought the errand boy would come looking for him during that time, but he only came after more time had passed than expected. I guess there were a lot of opinions among the errand boys. I applaud you first. How could an ordinary human being come this far after only 2 tutorials? The errand boy manages the tutorial, and another of their jobs was to give proper rewards and penalties to those who went beyond the tutorial's boundaries. Yuan had hunted the boss of the second tutorial, the mother worm. The mother of the earthworms and the monster that maintained the ecosystem of the second tutorial. However, because of Yuan, the mother worm had died, and the tutorial was completely cleared, unlike the original plan. What's the reward? And the price for hunting the mother worm wasn't specified in the tutorial system. Of course, in the first place, it wasn't a being that was made to be hunted in the second tutorial. Even if you were lucky enough to hunt the earthworms, the mother worm was a type of monster that you could only see after at least the 5th tutorial. It seems that you already understand this world. Somewhat. It would be strange not to know that you get rewarded for special actions. Is that so? There are more people who don't know. Well, you seem to be a little special. The conversation was getting long. Yuan asked as if he was annoyed. So, what's the reward? You can choose one of 3 things. What are they? The first is the right to move on to the 5th tutorial. In this case, of course, I will provide you with information and clear rewards for the 3rd and 4th tutorials. It was a useless reward. At least, Yuan didn't plan on just skipping the tutorial. In particular, the 3rd tutorial was the most necessary process for Yuan out of the entire tutorial. It was a reward that wouldn't really affect Yuan, unlike other people. He's using his last brain cell. Perhaps the errand boys would know that the 3rd and 4th tutorials already meant nothing to Yuan. It was natural. If he could achieve this much in the 2nd tutorial, he would be able to pass the 3rd and 4th tutorials without difficulty. In other words, all they wanted was to hurry Yuan and send him to the next tutorial. Yuan waited for the errand boy's next words without saying anything. The second is points. Isn't that the best thing in any world? In this world, points are money. The errand boy drew a circle with his finger. Points were both strength and money. This reward wasn't bad. What's the next one? The last one is a connection to Olympus. Yuan's eyes narrowed. This was an unexpected type of story. Olympus, the middle manager of the tutorial. The name of Olympus being mentioned from the errand boy's mouth. You may not know, but this tutorial is only the starting point. There are countless beings with enormous power and gods in the vast tower. This was a truly unexpected development. Information that should never be revealed in the tutorial area. That information should never be revealed in the tutorial area. And, administrator. Yuan suspected the errand boy's connection to Olympus and summoned the administrator, who killed the errand boy and confirmed Olympus's intervention. Yu-won sees this as a successful hunt. As it turned out, that information was mentioned by none other than the errand boy. I will recommend you to Olympus. Olympus is one of the forces that governs the tower. If you can receive their sponsorship, you will be safe in the tower even after leaving the tutorial. Yu-won chuckled. It was to the point where he wondered if the errand boy was not an errand boy but a scout for Olympus. Olympus, Kronos, who had sent Yu-won to the past, was also a ranker who originally belonged to Olympus. And Olympus, as the errand boy said, was one of the great forces that governed the tower. If he could borrow their power, he might be able to climb the tower faster and more safely. However, I'll take the second option. Yu-won's choice was not the third. Reward is paid. 10,000 points acquired. It was a simple reward, but the number was enormous. 10,000 points. It was a number that was hard to imagine getting in the tutorial area. It was quite a satisfactory reward. But it seemed that Yu-won was the only one who was satisfied. Really, the errand boy made a sour face as if he didn't like Yu-won's decision. But Yu-won had no intention of changing his mind. Yeah, think carefully. You haven't used the points yet, so I'll let you change your decision. It must have been a decision you made because you don't know much about Olympus, so don't regret it later. Hey, errand boy, question mark. If you're here to run errands for the administrator, why don't you do your job properly? What do you think the administrator will do to you if you get caught doing Olympus's dirty work? Yu-won's words made the errand boy's eyes widen. It was because of the word, administrator, that came out of Yu-won's mouth. This isn't something you agreed on with the other errand boys, is it? And you definitely haven't talked to the administrator. How did you, besides you, did the other errand boys receive similar offers? Were you all bribed from the same place? Heaven, Diva, Legemitin. Who are you? The errand boy's voice trembled. This was the first time this had happened. At least in the tutorial, the errand boy, who had absolute power and authority, was trembling in front of a mere participant. Yu-won said with a slightly bitter expression. Thank you, errand boy. It didn't matter which group had bribed the errand boys. This tutorial had to be a place separate from the tower. Moreover, he could never tolerate Olympus being involved in the tutorial. Thanks to your blabbering, I figured out one more thing I have to do here. In this world, anything could be done with points. And among the ways to use points in this tower, there was this. Request a private audience with the administrator. Pay 1,000 points. Goo, clatter, clatter. The subway where Yu-won and the errand boy were located shook violently. It felt like the world was shaking. The errand boy looked at Yu-won, trembling. What did you do? I requested a private audience with the administrator. Yu-won looked at the unfolding space. The administrator approves the private audience. He'll be here soon. Even without that, Yu-won was a participant who had stood out in this tutorial. The administrator would be interested in him, big or small, and Yu-won's request was approved. And now, a private audience request in the tutorial. A huge presence that seemed to crush his whole body appeared inside the subway. And for only 1,000 points. Ha ha ha, the administrator burst into laughter as if it were funny. It would be funny. A private audience with the administrator, which would cost tens of thousands of points if it were inside the tower, could be solved with just 1,000 points in this tutorial. No matter how different the value of points was between the tower and the tutorial, it couldn't help but be funny from the administrator's point of view. Tutorial, the lowest level administrator of the tower. The tutorial was a kind of gate. And the administrator of the tutorial was called the lowest level administrator because he was the one who selected those who would enter the tower. The administrator was the being who ruled a floor. It was never properly revealed what kind of being the administrator was, but they definitely had power comparable to even the highest ranking rankers. Ah, Administrator Nim. The errand runner's voice trembled at the administrator's appearance. Unlike that immense presence or deep laughter, the administrator's appearance was crude and unsightly. A giant beggar with a long beard. That was all there was to describe the administrator who appeared before them. The administrator walked briskly forward and stood in front of Yu-won as if errand runners were beneath his notice. So, you asked for a private audience. With me, the administrator hid his presence. If he had shown his presence properly, Yu-won would have had a hard time even breathing in front of him. Tutorial participant, Kim Yu-won. Kukuku, I've heard the stories. You killed over 1,000 deceased in the first tutorial. Yes, when my subordinates checked, they said there were no irregularities or oddities, but it seems that was true. That's the most unique thing. Yu-won wasn't the only one interested in him. The administrator who managed the entire tutorial and ordered the errand runners was also interested in Yuan. How did you know about my existence? How did you know how to request a private audience? The administrator wondered. How did Yuan know about the existence of the administrator or private audiences, which were not supposed to be revealed in the second tutorial? And why did Yuan request a private audience with him? I know that there is such a law in the tutorial. A law? What is that? All information about the tutorial must be found out by the participant themselves, not by the administrator or any other being of the tower. Yuan looked up at the administrator, who was over 2 meters tall, and continued speaking. It's the law that you set. That was Yuan's answer. The information he knew was only found out through his own abilities. The administrator looked into Yuan's eyes. There could be no being within this tutorial that could lie to the administrator. At least within this tutorial that he managed, he had the power to see through the truth and falsehood of all words. I see. The administrator quickly dismissed his doubts. It didn't matter how he had found out the information. If there was no one else's intervention in the information that Yuan had found out, then it didn't matter. Yuan quickly turned the administrator's interest elsewhere. Rather, it seems like the tower is intervening on this side. This side, the errand runner. The errand runner, who had been quietly watching Yuan's words, looked at the administrator and chuckled. It was as if he was winking at Yuan, asking him to keep it a secret. It was ridiculous. Olympus contacted the errand runners. Olympus, yes, they told me that they would give me Olympus's sponsorship as a reward. The administrator's expression crumpled. As if to see if that was true, the administrator looked at the errand runner. The moment their eyes met, BZZT, crash, the administrator's arm swung down and crushed the errand runner's body in an instant. Thud, the errand runner's body, which had been in the form of a clown, was crushed and blood flowed out. The administrator flicked the blood off of his hand and muttered. Those damn Olympus bastards, are they reaching this far now? The administrator's eyes turned red. It seemed like Olympus's intervention had really pissed him off. The administrator gnashed his teeth for a while and looked at the spot where the errand runner had been crushed before turning his head to look at Yuan. Thank you. Thanks to you, I was able to get rid of the rotten parts. The administrator was no fool. He didn't think that the errand runner here just happened to be related to Olympus. It was probably the same for the other errand runners. Yuan's lips curled up at the administrator's greeting. The second law of the tutorial. Quote. All actions and results of the participant within the tutorial are rewarded based on the level of extraordinariness. Yuan looked at the errand runner's body that the administrator had crushed to death. I spent legitimate points to summon you and hunted the errand runner through you. Yuan looked into the administrator's eyes. What do you think? Chapter 8. The administrator was silent for a while after hearing Yuan's words. He soon opened his mouth to speak with a laugh. Hoo-ha, that's true as well. The administrator stroked his beard. He then lowered his body to match Yuan's gaze. You're probably the first participant to kill the errand boy in just the second tutorial. Oh, right, this is also a first. Hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. The administrator laughed strangely. It seemed like he had belatedly understood what had just happened and was bewildered. Yuan's words were correct. In the end, the administrator accepted Yuan's exclusive right and learned the secret of the errand boy. As a result, the administrator ended up killing the errand boy himself. Just as Yuan had intended. Even if you didn't do it yourself, that's definitely a great achievement. The death of the errand boy was originally something that shouldn't have happened. The errand boy was a middle manager who managed the tutorial on behalf of the administrator. The strength of such an errand boy was something that all tutorial participants couldn't do anything about, even if they all attacked him together. If you had to compare him to someone, he was close to a ranker in the tower. That errand boy had just died. Even though he had borrowed the administrator's hand, it was clearly something that Yuan had planned and carried out. Thank you. Then what do you want? It seems like you've already received a lot of points. Let's see, a suitable reward. The administrator fell into thought. It seemed like he was taking a long time to think about the reward, as the death of the errand boy was something that had happened for the first time. Yuan waited for the administrator's decision. About 5 minutes passed. The administrator, who had been sitting still and lost in thought, got up and slapped his knee. That should be enough. The administrator held out his palm to Yuan. Contact between hands. It was a common method used to exchange points in the tutorial in the tower. However, there was no reason for the administrator, who controlled the tutorial system, to hold out his palm just to hand over points. And the same went for other ordinary skills. Why would he? The administrator held out his hand. Yuan grabbed his hand, not knowing what it meant. That moment, you have acquired, Lord of Mana. Mana recovery has increased slightly. Resistance to mana has increased slightly. Sensitivity to mana has increased slightly. Magic power has increased by 5. Along with the consecutive messages, a blue light briefly flashed around Yuan's body and disappeared. What? Yuan's eyes widened. The administrator let out a small laugh at the change in expression on Yuan's face and said. Hoo-ha, then let's see each other again after the third tutorial. I have to go take care of things below from now on. Coo goo goo goo. Once again, the inside of the subway shook. He disappeared by tearing through space in the same flashy way he had appeared. Yuan looked in the direction the administrator had disappeared in and checked his skill, thinking it couldn't be. Lord of Mana, hash rank, S+. Hash proficiency, 0.00%. Hash one of the authorities possessed by the administrator who governs mana. Hash mana recovery rate increased by 10%. Hash mana resistance increased by 10%. Hash sensitivity to mana increased. Hash dominance over mana increased. A skill of S+ rank. It was one of the authorities that the administrator possessed. Something like this can appear in the tutorial. He hadn't expected to get a skill of this level, even though he had killed the errand boy. He would have been satisfied if he had just gotten an A rank skill or item. The authority of the administrator. It was a skill of a type that even Yuan had never seen before. Dominance over mana. In the tower, mana was everything. Naturally, the power that handles that mana, magic power, also became the biggest standard for dividing the strong and the weak. He could control that mana. Literally, it was an ability that wasn't lacking enough to be called an authority. I guess I won't be able to use it properly yet. The first type of skill that I have ever handled. However, I knew how to use this type of skill well. Rather than being powerful in one skill, it was a skill that blended well with any skill, greatly enhancing the user's overall abilities. The usefulness of such skills varied greatly depending on the level of proficiency. Should I thank Olympus? Swish, whoosh, a blue sphere gathered above his outstretched palm. The sphere did not gather smoothly and continued to change shape in a bumpy manner. It was proof that he was not yet able to properly condense his mana. It was an immature form of mana ball. Mana ball in the second tutorial. Yuan looked at the mana ball on his palm. Although it had not taken on a proper form, it was definitely a mana ball. Yuan's magic stat was only 26. Even that was a number achieved using the random stat from hunting a mind worm and using all 2 of his free stat points. Mana ball was a technique that required a magic stat of 40 or higher, as well as quite a difficult level of mana control. He had managed to create such a mana ball, even though it was unstable, with a magic stat of only 26. It was partly because Yuan's mana control was that good, but it would have been impossible without the correction effect of Lord of Mana. Bang! In the end, the unstable mana ball in Yuan's palm exploded. The force within the exploded mana ball spread out in all directions, leaving burn marks on the nearby floor. Snap! Yuan clenched his fist. Not bad. Yuan's goal was not simply to pass the tutorial safely. It was not about climbing the tower and becoming a ranker to gain wealth and power. But it's not enough. The outer gods were beings who could be described as all-powerful. In order to fight them, it was not enough to simply regain his previous strength and follow the same path. He needed more cards. More. After taking a break, taking care of the errand, and receiving the reward from the administrator. There were about 14 hours left until the complete end of the second tutorial. During that time, all Yuan did was hunt. The worms existed not only in the most spacious underground area, the subway, but also in any underground area of the building. Yuan traveled all over the underground area, hunting the worms. Since the only monsters that appeared in the second tutorial were earthworms, he had no choice. As the second tutorial was about to end. Name: Kim Yuan. Level: 26. Strength: 33. Agility: 29. Health: 30. Perception: 26. Magic: 30. Points: 10,027. Free stat points: 0. Achievements in 13 hours. Yuan had reached level 21 by catching the mind worm, and had leveled up 5 times in 13 hours. It's impossible with just the worms now. Level 26. At this level, it wouldn't be difficult for anyone, not just Yuan, to hunt earthworms. In the tutorial, hunting an opponent stronger and more difficult than oneself would grant a greater reward. Naturally, hunting monsters much weaker than oneself would slow down the leveling process. But thankfully, the second tutorial is almost over. 1 hour left. Yuan decided to go back up. When the time was up and the second tutorial ended, another reward would be given inside the safe zone. It was uncertain, but people outside the safe zone might miss out on the reward. Thud. Yuan climbed out of the underground and headed above ground. Outside, a day had already passed and night had fallen, and it was evening again. And what he saw there was. What is that? Inside the safety zone that no longer shrinks. There were 2 large groups inside the large circle, divided in half. The people were arguing with each other over something. So let's just wait a little longer. Hongdae has become like this, so what will the government do? If we wait just 1 more day, surely. Stop talking nonsense. The world has changed, not just Hongdae, but everything. How can you believe that? Haven't you heard the explanation until now? What zone do you think this is? Do you think this is the only place like this? Even if that's true, it's almost time now. Why do we have to do this? If there's a second time, won't there be a third, fourth time? Do you think the next one will be safer than this? What if this safety zone suddenly disappears? By that time, it might be too dangerous to even get the food that was just over there. Whatever. Let's quickly organize the next food supply team. Who's going? We don't have time. The people were fighting, and the groups of that fight were classified into 2. Those who accepted this world, and those who didn't. The weak, and the relatively strong. The ones who accepted it wanted to supply food inside the safety zone. They needed to avoid the earthworms on this land, and take food from convenience stores and various restaurants. Don't be so resentful, you were all going to die anyway, but now you can live longer. That's not it. If we live, we should all live together. Then let's all die together like this. What is this? The people were fighting over the issue of bringing food. And within that, they each created groups, and some of them seemed to have already formed teams and were quite close. I can see why it turned out like that. The people who were packed into the huge safety zone. There was only one reason why that sight occurred. Too many survived. As a result of going through the first and second tutorial, even those who should have died from the zombies and competition between people survived. No matter how much effort Wu Jin puts in, the end of those who were eliminated like that will not change. Those who are going to die will die. Those who are going to live will survive. That was the law of this tutorial, and that law did not change even in the tower. Oh, over there. A person. Isn't that a person outside? People who discovered Wu Jin walking from afar appeared. Wu Jin walked towards the safety zone with a bag on his back. The people were surprised by the fact that there was a person outside the safety zone, and on the other hand, they were worried. Wu Jin walked towards the safety zone while receiving the gazes of the people. Was it because he hunted so many worms? The worms that should have been targeting Wu Jin and running towards him did not appear. Just like that, he almost approached the safety zone. Squirm. As I thought, there was still a worm left. Something squirmed under Wu Jin's feet. And a few sharp-eyed people who saw it shouted. There, down there, it's dangerous. An earthworm rose from the ground to eat Wu Jin. However, the number of earthworms that Wu Jin had already caught had exceeded 4 digits. Even if it was a surprise attack on the ground, not underground. Kwachik, Uduk, it was not that difficult to crush the earthworm that had risen through the ground with perfect timing. Perhaps because of his strength stat of 33, the earthworm's head was crushed without much effort, and its breath quickly stopped. The gazes pouring towards Wu Jin. Remaining time. 0 hours 5 minutes and 12 seconds. Wu Jin checked the remaining time and said. Continue the story you were talking about. Don't mind me. Chapter 9. Yuan walked heavily into the safe zone. People were murmuring at the absurd sight. What is that? Was it something you could have caught? If something like that was. People's gazes swept over the pieces of corpses scattered everywhere, following Yuan, who had stomped on and killed the earthworm. If the earthworm was something that could be hunted, then what were those thousands of people who had died outside the safe zone? Yuan. At that moment, someone approached Yuan. A familiar voice. He turned his head and saw Kim Myung-hoon approaching through the crowd. Where did you go? I was worried because you suddenly disappeared. He seemed to be quite talented at acting. In front of this many people, he could greet his junior, whom he had beaten up just yesterday, with a smile without his voice trembling. He must have judged that it was more beneficial for him to show his camaraderie with Yuan right now. Instead of answering Kim Myung-hoon, Yuan looked around. A chaotic atmosphere. The gazes of the people watching him were a complex mixture of alert, fear, and anticipation. Yuan's gaze then turned to the number written on the transparent wall at the edge of the safe zone. 1427 1500. There were 1500 people in the garden. 1427 was far from that number. Besides, the food those people have. Yuan pointed to the food that people were holding in their hands, which seemed to have come from a convenience store or a hamburger shop, and asked. Did you bring that from the other side? The distance to the nearest convenience store from the safe zone was about 20 meters. It seemed that the food they were eating had been brought from outside the safe zone. We had no choice. We don't know when we'll run out of food, and the third and fourth tutorials will definitely be more dangerous than this. So you needed food, that's what you're saying? Yes. It's not wrong. Now, less than 3 minutes were left in the second tutorial. The commotion just now seemed to have been an argument over the need to hurry up and get the remaining food before the end of the second tutorial. Are the supply teams over there? Yuan looked at a group of people who were relatively small, passive, and huddled together. They're the ones who were pushed out. The people who had almost died in the orange safe zone. They were the ones who had supplied food and returned to the safe zone. So you pushed them out again? To get them to supply food. They would have died anyway. That was true, they would have died if things had stayed the same. However, that didn't mean that those who had survived had the right to decide whether they lived or died. They would have died anyway, so they should risk their lives to bring food. Yuan looked into Kim Myung-hoon's eyes. Doesn't that seem a little off? Kim Myung-hoon flinched at Yuan's gaze. His body zoomed out despite just standing there and watching. He didn't seem like the Yuan that Kim Myung-hoon had known until recently. Kim Myung-hoon averted his gaze slightly. Then, the group that had been with him until just now came into view. He felt a surge of courage that he hadn't had before. Kim Myung-hoon met Yuan's gaze again and opened his mouth. It seems like you haven't adapted yet. Adapted? Do you still think this is the same soft and fluffy world as before? Do you think it's like the world where laws and morals prevailed? Kim Myung-hoon asked and looked around. At his gaze, people nodded one by one. It was both an agreement with Kim Myung-hoon's words and a rationalization of their own actions. The world had changed, so there was nothing they could do. In order for me to live, I have no choice but to sacrifice others. That thought was what had driven those few people out of the safe zone. Yuan, you have to become a coward in order to survive. You have to become a coward and selfish. I'm not telling you this as a senior, but as a human being. Adaptation. Yuan let out a hollow laugh. Never would he have thought that he would hear such words from a crybaby like Kim Myung-hoon. The second tutorial has ended. All participants in the safe zone will receive 500 points. Inventory pouch acquired. Inventory pouch will disappear upon death. Thud. A small bag in the shape of a crossbody bag fell over everyone's head. Wu Yian picked up the bag that had fallen to the floor and opened his mouth. There are many ways to survive. I don't really want to get involved or give advice. But you know what? Starting tutorial 3, don't cross the line. Whatever it is. It was a vague kind of warning. Wu Yian didn't say properly what that line was. There wasn't much time to talk properly. Wu Yian turned his gaze away from Kim Myung-hoon after finishing his words. Now it was time for everyone to focus on the contents of the next tutorial. Hunt monsters in the area to obtain 50 essences. After 70 hours, the gate will be activated. The area will be destroyed if the time limit is exceeded. Time limit: 72 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. In the middle of the street with the safe zone, a translucent passage appeared far away at the end. A number was written on the passage. 0/50ths, 50. That was the number of essences that the participants of tutorial 3 had to collect. The translucent color probably meant that the gate had not yet been activated. Is that a passage? If you collect 50 essences, you can move to the next tutorial area. Perhaps that was the passage to the next tutorial area. In order to use that passage, you had to collect 50 essences. It was a fairly simple mission. Those who heard the explanation of the tutorial had similar thoughts. It's just like a game. Hunt monsters and collect items. It was a quest that anyone who had played a game would have received at least once. However, when it came to actually doing it in reality, it was never easy. Hey, over there, zombies. Hey, aren't those zombies? Several zombies were seen in the middle of the street. They were clearly seen to have disappeared after tutorial 1 ended. It wasn't just zombies. Unknown monsters were wandering around everywhere. There were giant spiders and pigs with fur that stood up like needles. On the walls of the building, civets the size of a human's forearm were crawling around. The world is full of This world had already become a dungeon. And among them, someone looked at the floor and shouted. The safe zone is safe. Really? Wu Yian clicked his tongue at the cheers. Tisk. Those who cheered would probably not survive. The purpose of this tutorial 3 was not mere survival, but hunting. 50 essences. Only by collecting them could you proceed to the next tutorial and survive. You wouldn't be able to move on to the next one if you were just peace of mind in the safe zone. Wu Yian got up from his seat and started to move. Then, Wu Yian, Kim Myung-hoon grabbed Wu Yian. Wu Yian, who had half stepped out of the safe zone at the sound of his voice calling him, turned his head. Wu Yian had an expression that said to hurry up and say whatever he had to say. How about we do it together? Wouldn't it be easier for you if you had a colleague? Kim Myung-hoon said so and held out his hand to Wu Yian. This was the second time he had reached out to Wu Yian. Once at the beginning of tutorial 2, and once in tutorial 3. Wu Yian stared blankly at his hand and replied. It hasn't even been a day, have you forgotten already? What? Kim Myung-hoon made a puzzled expression as if to say what was he talking about, and then his face crumpled. If you want to live, don't try to cling to someone else, just go over there and wait quietly. Don't cause trouble. Just before tutorial 2 began. It was something Wu Yian had said to him. Kim Myung-hoon's expression distorted. The answer to the question of whether he had forgotten was enough with that expression. You remember. Wu Yian turned around after finishing his words and started to walk out of the safe zone. Kim Myung-hoon gritted his teeth as he watched Wu Yian's back, who had just returned and disappeared again. That kid, he's bluffing. Wu Yian had been wandering around outside the safe zone since tutorial 2. There were monsters everywhere outside, but he would probably be safe even if he was alone. We have to catch those guys and collect some kind of essence. Kim Myung-hoon looked around at the monsters outside. There were various kinds of monsters. Unlike other times, this tutorial was not something you could survive by just running away. It was a mission where you had to catch them and collect 50 items to survive. 50 inches. Perhaps this bag given to all the participants was for the purpose of collecting the beads. Kim Myung-hoon looked at the bag and the monsters outside the safe zone alternately for a moment. Then, a thought suddenly came to him, and the corners of his mouth turned up. Hey, everyone, did you hear? Kim Myung-hoon lowered the corners of his mouth and asked, looking around. There were two reactions from the people who heard the mission. One was to be frightened by the fact that they had to fight the monsters, and the other was to be prepared for the fight. You all know what we have to do to survive from now on. Kim Myung-hoon drew his sword. Let's do it once, well. Yoo-won watched Kim Myung-hoon's back as he started gathering people again. People have become clever and provocative. The world that had suddenly changed was enough to drive people crazy. In the process, people become cruel and selfish. Maybe Kim Myung-hoon's change wasn't that special. Rather, this is a more natural change. That's why Yoo-won had no intention of clashing with people like Kim Myung-hoon one by one. There were many ways to survive, and it was not something he could interfere with just because the method was wrong. Anyway, thud, Yoo-won went down to the subway station. I won't see you after the third tutorial is over. Jeek, Yoo-won opened the bag he was holding and turned it upside down. Swoosh, the beads that poured out of the bag went into the newly acquired inventory pouch. The number was probably over 100. Essence of mana. 132 50ths. Is it because I entered the third tutorial? The number of beads and essences that went into the inventory pouch was displayed. Yoo-won threw the bag on the floor and hung the inventory pouch around his waist. I was lucky to be able to get the essence from the second tutorial. The essence of mana was an item required to pass the third tutorial. However, it was also possible to obtain the essence from the worms that appeared in the second tutorial. So Yoo-won started hunting the worms and collecting the essence until the second tutorial ended. Yoo-won's hunting speed was fast. The number of essences he had obtained in just one day far exceeded the past conditions of the tutorial. Even if he didn't do anything from now on, Yoo-won would be able to move on to the fourth tutorial. However, can I collect about 1,000? Yoo-won had no intention of being satisfied with just 130 essences. Krr, shriek, squeak. When the third tutorial started, the inside of the subway station had changed into another form of dungeon. Not only earthworms, but also zombies, moss spiders, and underground snakes. All kinds of monsters were gathered. The subway was by far the largest dungeon in the Hongdae area. There are so many. Is this a welcoming greeting for someone who just entered the dungeon? Yoo-won muttered as he watched the monsters gathering rapidly. Let's try it again. Swoosh, whoosh. Yoo-won raised his hand. The mana spread around mixed with Yuan's mana and began to gather on the palm of his hand. Strength 30, and the proficiency of Master of Mana was 0.5%. Compared to when he first tried it, the stats had only gone up by 4 and the skill's proficiency had only gone up a little. Shriek, shriek, as if that alone was enough, the unstable mana sphere began to stabilize slowly. How long had he been concentrating? Mana core has been completed. Mana core has been registered as a skill. A complete form of mana core was completed on Yuan's hand. Chapter 10. Alright, the flow of mana has stabilized. The mana orb was no longer shaking. The fact that it had been registered as a skill meant that the mana orb was definitely complete. Buzz, buzz, the mana orb, which was the size of a fist, cried out to release its power. As expected, it still can't be controlled properly. But still, Yuan aimed his palm at the approaching monsters. This should be enough. Wang, the moment the mana orb, which was the size of a fist, in his palm began to glow. Ka-boom, a strong light burst forward from Yuan. Boom, thud, the stairs leading down to the subway station collapsed. The heads of the monsters that were running towards Yuan flew off, and their bodies exploded and rolled on the floor. The range wasn't that wide, but the power was considerable. It's still difficult to control. Yuan felt his magical power draining away like water from a broken bottle. The consumption of magical power was too great. It was because he could only complete one mana orb by pouring out all his magical power. I need to raise my stats and skill proficiency a little bit more. It might not be the case in the tutorial, but when he goes up to the tower, mana orbs become one of the most basic techniques. A simple and ignorant technique that concentrates mana in one point and shoots it out. That's why mana orbs were also a measure of the user's magical power and mana control ability. As expected, it's not my style. Of course, there were people who used mana orbs as their main attack. However, even though Yuan could create and use mana orbs, he didn't use them actively in battle. Thud, thud, rumble, 2 crystals fell and rolled on the floor. Not all monsters dropped crystals. You might get one after hunting 10 monsters. The probability wasn't that high. Even so, Yuan had been quite lucky so far. He had already collected this many crystals. Yuan picked up the crystals that were rolling on the floor and put them in his inventory pouch. Then, looking at the monsters that were hesitating from the power of the mana orb, he pulled out his sword. What the? Crunch. Yuan went down the stairs. Why are you so scared? The third tutorial was a hunting ground. The remaining time was 72 hours. Yuan had no intention of wasting that time. 2 days have passed since the start of the third tutorial. The tutorial with the highest number of deaths was the first tutorial, but in terms of percentage, the tutorial with the highest number of deaths was this third tutorial. Out of about 1,400 people, only about 400 people survived after 2 days. The survival rate of the third tutorial was less than 30%. Aren't we going too deep? I know, it's a bit creepy here. What can we do? We have to come in here and hide. But was Hongdae Station originally this big? Anyone remember? I don't know. The world is upside down, so maybe this place is upside down too. 3 people entered Hongdae Station. 1 woman and 2 men. Juyeon, the woman who was walking while looking behind her, opened her mouth. Hey, hey, over there. What? Huh, a convenience store. The faces of the 3 people lit up. They were worried because they had almost run out of the food they had brought, but a convenience store had appeared. There should be ramen, right? We don't have boiling water, so what ramen? We can just eat it raw. Let's go in quickly. I'm starving. The 3 people hurried to the convenience store, thinking that they should stock up on food in their inventory pouches while they had the chance. Just then, something fell on the head of the man who was running in the front. Thud, hiss, og, Junho. It was a huge spider with a green glow. The man whose head was covered by the spider let out a painful scream and collapsed sideways on the spot. His head melted, and flesh and blood mixed with poison flowed down to the floor. At that sight, Juyeon took out the sword she was holding, and Sungchan, the man next to her, grabbed a large hammer. Growl, bang, crash, a strange cry. Nearby the convenience store, monsters started to appear one by one. There was 1 zombie, 2 moss spiders, and 3 ghouls. The number is, why are there so many? Even without this, they already lost one of their comrades. Can we win? Ju-woon's heart started to race. For 2 days, the 3 of them, including her, survived pretty ruthlessly. They hunted zombies and monsters outside, and they overcame several life-threatening situations. Their levels also increased quite a bit. All three of them had gone up 10 levels in the past 2 days, and thanks to that, their stats were much better than before. However, she couldn't be sure if that alone would be enough to hunt the monsters in front of them. There wasn't much time to think. The 3 ghouls that were right before their eyes quickly charged at them. Swish, thud, screech. The ghouls that were as big as large Jindo dogs were the most agile monsters that appeared in the subway. Ju-woon hurriedly swung her sword at the ghoul that was charging at her. It was a weapon she bought from the errand boy for 200 points. Take this. Slice, thud. The sword failed to cut the ghouls. It would have been different if they were slow-moving zombies, but the ghouls cleverly dodged Ju-woon's sword here and there. The 2 moss spiders that melted their comrade's head with poison were the same. They quickly crawled on the floor and approached them. Get away, Sung-chan. Ju-woon desperately tried to shake off the ghouls. Slash, screech. She bit one ghoul and cut down another. And in the meantime, Sung-chan, who was dealing with 2 moss spiders and a zombie, screamed as the zombie bit his back. Arg, no, it might have been possible with 3 people, but it was too much for 2 people to deal with 6 monsters. To die here like this. How did she survive up to the 3rd tutorial? She wanted to struggle a little more and survive. At that moment, while her eyes were focused on Sung-chan for a moment. Thwack, gasp, one ghoul jumped up and covered Ju-woon's face. And at that moment, slice, boom, something flew in and burst the body of the ghoul that was flying in like a balloon. Huh, Ju-woon made a dumbfounded expression at the sudden situation. Suddenly, pieces of the exploded ghoul and blood splattered all over her head and body. However, before she could feel disgusted or dirty, Ju-woon turned her head towards the convenience store. Creak, the broken door creaked open. I was sleeping, but it's so noisy. And through that, a person came out. You woke me up. Yu-won asked for a little sleep. No matter how much his stats increased, moving without sleeping for several days was bound to accumulate fatigue and make his body dull. Including the 1st and 2nd tutorial, it had been 3 whole days without sleep. The place where he asked for sleep was the warehouse of the convenience store inside the subway station. There was one reason why he could sleep in the subway where monsters were roaming around. It was all thanks to the odorless powder. Yu-won bought the odorless powder from the newly changed errand boy for 100 points. The odorless powder had the effect of erasing the surrounding odors and protecting it from monsters with sensitive noses. Yu-won, who woke up from his sleep, first checked the time. 22 hours 58 minutes and 12 seconds. There were about 23 hours left. Quite some time had passed. It's been about 6 hours. Yu-won got up with a big yawn. 6 hours. It was a decent amount of time to relieve fatigue. A desire unrelated to fatigue, the desire to sleep a little more, crept up on him. Well, I pushed myself too hard. 3 days. Even so, he wondered if he had been too greedy for hunting. It was because he had pushed himself too hard with the thought that he had to level up enough in the early tutorial, especially before the end of the 3rd tutorial. He wanted to sleep more. That thought didn't go away for a while. That was when, Junho, a loud noise. Yu-won quickly shook off his desire for sleep. The drowsiness that had made him stick his head out for a moment because of the noise also disappeared. It didn't matter. Anyway, any more sleep would only make his body heavy and dull. Yu-won got up from his seat. As he left the warehouse, Yu-won saw 2 people fighting monsters at the entrance of the convenience store. There were 3 voices earlier, but it seemed that one of them had fallen to the floor and died. Looks like the rest of them are going to die if we leave them alone. What were these people doing here? It would have been better to hunt at the entrance of the subway station if possible. There wouldn't be as many monsters there as there were here, except for the entrance that Yu-won had cleared out the first time. Should I check out the situation outside? Yu-won looked around. Inside the convenience store, the closest thing he could see was a bunch of heavy canned drinks. Yu-won took out 2 canned drinks and held them in his hands. Monkey's Eye is activated. It was always mystical to experience the power of a skill that had leveled up. As his eyes activated, he could feel his whole body's senses changing. Sounds became clearer, and directions became more precise. He could clearly see the sound of footsteps, movements, breathing, and even the movements of the ghouls flying around. Yu-won's arm moved. He threw the can in his hand with all his might. Shuaik, clang, plop, the can flew through the door and hit the ghoul's body. The can exploded, and the ghoul's head exploded with it. Thud, thud, Yu-won picked up one of the cans and threw it again. Plop, the head of the zombie that was biting the man's body also exploded. The urgent fire had been put out for the time being. Yu-Won picked up the other cans that were piled up and opened the door of the convenience store and went outside. I was sleeping, and you're bothering me. Yu-Won looked at Ju-Woon and Sung-Hoon alternately. You're awake now. Flick, thud, Yu-Won threw a can of drink up and caught it. Right after, plop, the can that had just flown out of Yu-Won's hand exploded the head of another ghoul. Screech, rustle, plop, a ghoul and an ogre were cut down, and the body of another ogre was crushed under Yu-Won's foot and exploded to death. Sizzle, the poison that flowed out of the ogre's body bubbled on the floor for a moment. It all happened in an instant. Ju-Woon couldn't even say thank you as she looked at the cans of drinks that had fallen to the floor with a dazed expression. Did he kill them with this? Monsters. These were guys who didn't die easily even with a decent sword strike. Moreover, ghouls were so fast-moving that it wasn't easy to cut them down even with a sword swung close up. Yu-Won had killed those monsters by hitting them with cans and simultaneously swinging his sword at an invisible speed to cut down the other monsters. Even in a world where levels and stats existed. Is that possible? The question popped into his head for a moment. Ju-Woon realized that she hadn't even properly greeted him for saving her life. Thank you. I'm alive thanks to you. Thank you. Sung-Hoon couldn't finish his words because the wound from the zombie bite was painful. Yu-Won fumbled through his pocket, took out an ointment, and threw it. Thud, apply that first. It's pretty effective. What's your stamina stat? Yes, right now around 17 inches. Then you won't die. You might not be able to use your bitten arm in the future, though. Yes, so apply it quickly. It might not be too late now. Sung-Hoon made a surprised expression at the words that he wouldn't be able to use his arm. He hurriedly applied the ointment to the bitten area. Ju-Woon sighed and asked, sitting down in her seat. Were you hunting here the whole time? The subway must be dangerous. The subway was a kind of forbidden zone for the people above. The frequency of monster appearances was high, and the underground snake that appeared occasionally was so dangerous that even if several participants gathered, it would be difficult to hunt. I wasn't here the whole time. Ju-Woon had an expression that said, well, duh, at Yu-Won's answer. Of course, there was no way he could have stayed here all the time with the number of monsters that inhabited the subway. Yu-Won continued speaking. This is a resting place. I use it as a restaurant too. A resting place. Yu-Won stood up and said. The hunting ground is separate. Chapter 11. Ju-Woon and Seong-chan followed behind Yu-Won. The convenience store was right in front of them, but staying alive was more important than food. If they were to stay there and encounter another monster, they wouldn't be able to survive again. Where are we going? The hunting ground. Yu-Won continued to walk inward as he spoke. It was an unusual path. There was definitely no such path in Hongdae Station. The structure really has changed. Hongdae Station had become wider and deeper. Even the stairs they were going down now were not in Ju-Woon's memory. Are we going down further? The real hunting ground starts from the second basement floor. Was there a second floor? It was a fact that was not known because no one had ever gone down to the subway and returned. But really, the stairs continued further down. Seriously, there was a second floor dungeon. Another underground dungeon as wide as the subway. Ju-Woon gulped nervously. Yu-Won, who had arrived at the second floor dungeon, took out his weapon and asked. You know it's dangerous, so why did you come all the way here? At Yu-Won's question, Ju-Woon tightly gripped her weapon with both hands and answered in a tense voice. You wouldn't know because you've been here since the start of the third tutorial, but it's chaos outside right now. Yu-Won nodded. He already knew that fact. This really isn't a game. It may seem like the goal is simply hunting, but the third tutorial was more complicated than any of the previous tutorials. Hundreds of people gathered for one simple goal, obtaining items through hunting. This created a complex ecosystem. Groups are being formed, they're killing each other and distrusting one another. The fight to take this little bead continues. You were attacked and ran away. Yes, it seems like those guys didn't want to die with us, so they didn't chase us all the way here. But you almost died here too. Anyway, I'm alive, thanks to you. Kaya, a sound was heard. It was a type of cry they had never heard before. Ju-Woon and Seong-chan's bodies stiffened. Yu-Won seemed familiar with it and didn't react much to the cry. Instead, Yu-Won turned his back on the cry and looked back at the two. Where's the guarantee that I won't kill you and take your essence? Why, yes. Without realizing it, Ju-Woon and Seong-chan took a step back from Yu-Won. It was a creepy thing to say. Right now, if they became enemies, Yu-Won was scarier than the monsters crawling around everywhere. But didn't you already gather all the essence? To Seong Chan's hopeful question, Yu-won nodded. He had already gathered all the essence before the third tutorial even started. Then there's no reason to kill us, right? I'm still gathering essence. Even so, and even if I don't kill you, you'll die on your own, right? It was true. Right now, if Yu-won didn't help them, they were destined to die without him even needing to do anything. What do you want from us? At Ju-woon's question, Yu-won smirked. She was quite quick-witted. She had noticed that if Yu-won didn't want anything from them, he wouldn't have spoken to them at length like this. It's not a bad offer. If you do well, I'll even share some essence with you. Ju-woon and Seong Chan's eyes sparkled at Yu-won's words. Just escaping this subway station was already a blessing, but they could also get essence. It was quite an appealing offer for the two who had to gather 50 essence in just one day. Yu-won looked at Seong Chan. Your leg isn't hurt, right? Yes, I'm fine. Okay, then. Yu-won shook his head. Run. Sha, a giant snake approached. An underground serpent. It was the one that had appeared a few times at the entrance of the subway station. It was a monster that could swallow a person in one bite, and it was currently the monster with the highest hunting difficulty among all known monsters. And to escape that underground serpent, Seong Chan ran with all his might. His agility was the highest among their stats. However, the underground snake's speed was faster than Sungchan's. The distance narrowed in an instant, and Sungchan shouted. Sa, save me! The underground snake's head followed right behind Sungchan. And at that moment, the underground snake's mouth opened. Snap, creak, a sword entered the underground snake's open mouth. The underground snake's eyes flickered a few times. Immediately after, the underground snake's body fell down. Bam, the underground snake's blood spurted everywhere. Thud, thump, roll, the essence fell to the ground. Sungchan, who had been running in a hurry, looked back at the monsters that had been chasing him. Already that far, in that short amount of time, several monsters had already been cut down and were bleeding. Starting with the fastest underground snake, several unknown monsters had already become corpses. Yu-won's body shot up. A red lizard with a muscular body that reached 2 meters in size opened its mouth towards Yu-won. A long sword took on a blue glow. The moment Yu-won's and the lizard's bodies crossed, a bright red line was drawn on the lizard's body. Ugly, the lizard's head was cut down to its torso. Yu-won cut the lizard's breath in one swift motion and jumped up, stepping on the falling body. Thud, thump, thud, thud, thud. Essence poured onto the floor. Sungchan hurriedly picked up the essence that was rolling on the floor and stored it. 15 monsters and 5. The probability of getting essence is definitely higher. If he had hunted the monsters outside, even if he had hunted 15 monsters, he would have only gotten 1 or 2 essence. Was it because the hunting ground was different? Unlike zombies or moderately sized spiders, monsters like the underground snake or the giant lizard that Yu-won was currently hunting had a much higher probability of producing essence than other monsters. And the hunting speed is incredible. If he had been hunting at this speed, how many essence would Yu-won have? Even if he only counted the number of essence he had obtained in the past 2 hours, it seemed like it would be over 50. Thud, the last monster fell, and Yu-won picked up the essence that had fallen to the ground and put it in his inventory pouch. Quite a bit of blood had hardened on the sword he had purchased from the new errand boy. Yu-won turned his body and looked at Sungchan. How many? 6. This hunting raid was also a success. Including the essence that Yu-won had just picked up, it was 7. Yu-won received 5 essence and handed over one of them. Juan is a bit late. He'll be here soon. Sungchan and Juan's roles were the same. It was to drive as bait. This underground dungeon had quite a few strong individual monsters. Up until now, Yu-won had hunted those monsters down one by one. The probability of getting essence was high, but there was a limit to the amount of action an individual could take. Drive the monsters over. About 10 or so should be enough. At first, he wondered what about meant. But now he understood. The speed at which they're gathering them can't keep up with the hunting speed. It was an incredible level. Sungchan glanced at Yu-won, panting. He's not just strong, he's a different species. No matter how much mountain animals flew or crawled. If they were mere mountain animals, Yu-won was a species far above them. He would have to be compared to a dinosaur. There were strong people outside who had quickly started hunting and leveled up, but even so, they were only a little stronger than the rest of the group. Yu-won's strength was on a different level. What the hell is he going to do with all that essence? After they had joined, Yu-won had already collected all 50 essence. And even after that, he continued to hunt, still gathering essence. Suddenly, he became curious. What level are you? Level, yes. With this hunting speed, leveling up shouldn't be a problem. Yuan shook his head. It's not going up very well. What? I guess I'll have to go to the next tutorial to properly level up. Yuan shrugged as he answered. And level is personal information. Don't ask others about it, and don't answer if someone asks you. Same goes for stats. But you asked me how much stamina I had before. Then I guess I should have just let that arm rot away. Haha, Sungchan nodded awkwardly. I'll keep that in mind. In the world to come, information such as resident registration numbers or phone numbers would be meaningless. In the future, the most important information that would represent an individual would be things like level and stats. Sungchan realized for the first time how foolish it was to ask or reveal it carelessly. Yuan looked at Sungchan, who had started to move again to gather. At this rate, I might be able to gather more than I originally thought. 2 hours had passed since Sungchan and Juyan joined the hunt. The hunting speed had definitely increased. It was because they no longer had to move around separately to find monsters. It's about half as fast. It wasn't a bad result. As the hunting speed increased, the speed at which they acquired essence also increased. Even the speed at which new prey appears can't keep up with it. It was a pity that there was no hunting ground more difficult than the subway. Kya, sa, Yuan SSI, over here, over here. While they were taking a short break, Juyan came running with a group of monsters in tow. Yuan quickly started moving. There wasn't much time left. It was time to move again. Puck, the hammer in his hand slammed down on the underground serpent's head. The thrashing underground serpent stopped breathing. Sungchan shouted with a shudder. Yes, I got it. A level up message rang in his ear. He had caught the underground serpent. He had done it with Juyan, just the two of them. While following Yuan and hunting in a group, the two of them had steadily hunted one monster at a time. It was because of Yuan's advice that they should also pay attention to leveling up. Did you level up? Yeah, you too. Essence. Thud. Essence spewed out of the underground serpent's mouth. This was entirely their share. This underground serpent was not caught by Yuan, but by the two of them together. Is it over? Sungchan nodded when Yuan, who had been watching the two of them for a while, asked. Can we take this? Is that the last one? Yes. Yuan handed one of the essences that had fallen to the floor to Juyan. You're the last one too. Juyan nodded. 50. They had gathered all 50 essences, the condition for passing the third tutorial. Before meeting Yuan, they had only had 20, a number that they would never have been able to gather on their own. Yuan checked the time. 2 hours 57 minutes and 15 seconds. We need to hurry. There wasn't much time left. When there were 2 hours left, the gate to the next tutorial would be activated. They had to get outside before that, at the very least. If you're done, let's go up. Yuan checked the time and headed towards the stairs leading upstairs. We're finally going up. Sungchan, who had been staying underground, followed Yuan and asked in a tense voice. Will it still be a mess up there? Sungchan recalled the situation before he went down to the subway. The two of them had been attacked by a group and had been pushed all the way here. In the process, they had lost 2 friends, and they had lost another friend inside the subway station. Thinking about the situation at that time, he was a little scared to go outside. Still, Juyan shook her head at Sungchan's question. It's probably worse now. When they were attacked, there was still plenty of time left. However, even then, people were attacking and distrusting each other out of anxiety that they wouldn't be able to fill up their numbers. What's more, the third tutorial was almost over. There was no reason for the situation outside to be better than before. Will we be okay? We'll be fine. Juyan looked at Yuan, who was leading the way up the stairs. I'm worried about the people outside. Chapter 12. 2 hours 31 minutes and 41 seconds. Choi Jae-yun checked the time. After checking the time, he turned his head and looked at the gate, which was gradually turning red. There's really not much time left. Perhaps when the color of the gate turned completely red, he would be able to move on to the next tutorial. Of course, that was only for those who were qualified. I have 45. There were 5 left until he had 50. 2.5 hours. If he worked hard, he might be able to get it. He had leveled up quite a bit by now, so hunting had become that much easier. However, he couldn't be sure. That's why he had one thing in mind. But, people all think the same. In front of the gate, many people were gathered around the safety zone. People who were separated by a certain distance from each other were exchanging glances or having awkward conversations. Yeah, I mean, if you haven't collected it by now, this is the only way. How many do you have, Dusik? Choi Jae-yun asked his younger brother Dusik, who had been with him throughout the third tutorial. He counted the number of essences and replied. I have 42. 8. There's no way. The probability of an essence appearing was terrible. No matter how hard he was injured or how many monsters he killed, he would be lucky to get one. Even for the weakest creature, the zombie, it was difficult to get one even after killing more than 20. What kind of idiotic mission is this? This was a mission that could not be passed with just hunting. That's why people gathered here. The moment the door opened, they would take the essence that others had collected and move on to the next tutorial. However, the problem was that they were just gathering. I guess they don't plan to move. Maybe they'll move when the door opens. There were still 30 minutes left before the gate was activated. If someone attacked someone right now, the first to move would surely attract attention. And that meant becoming the enemy of all these people. The moment the gate is activated, I'll quickly take the essence and run away. Choi Jae-yun said so and looked at a group on the opposite side of the safe zone. Among the people gathered in front of the gate, there was a group of people who were unusually close together. They were the largest faction in this third tutorial. Brother, yeah, don't you think that guy is looking at us? Choi Jae-yun nodded at his younger brother Dusik's question. Well, we haven't been on good terms with those guys since a few days ago. We even had a fight. What are we going to do? They have a lot more numbers than us. So let's not move for now. There's no point in fighting. Do you think they haven't collected all of them yet? Some of them might have collected all of them. But not all of them. But why are they here? Because they don't have enough people. Do those guys have that kind of camaraderie? This isn't the end. If there's a third, there's a fourth, fifth, and sixth. Dusik frowned as if he didn't like it. Thud. At that moment, someone began to move. Everyone's attention was drawn as one person began to move while everyone was being cautious. Choi Jae-yun looked at the man who approached him. Kim Myung-hoon. He was the one who led the group on the opposite side of Choi Jae-yun. Kim Myung-hoon was big and good at fighting. Above all, what made him extraordinary was his clever tongue that could persuade people. Choi Jae-yun, who had 3 younger brothers including Dusik, had created a faction of over 20 people centered around them, but Kim Myung-hoon had created another faction that was even larger. At first, there were about 30 of them. However, it seemed that he had focused more on recruiting people in this tutorial. Now, the group centered around him seemed to be at least 50. Before he knew it, he had become the most influential person on this tutorial stage. Long time no see. It's only been a couple of days, right? I don't think we're on such good terms that we can greet each other like that. I don't think we're close enough to greet each other so warmly. There was no longer a smile on his face, and he was now completely hostile toward Woo Yun. Choi Jae-yun responded coldly to Kim Myung-hoon's greeting. The two factions had already clashed once. At that time, the numbers were similar, so it ended as a minor clash, and it was possible to move on dramatically. But now the situation was different. Kim Myung-hoon knew it too. Hey, you're being proud again. Do you know what will happen? Kim Myung-hoon's laughter made Choi Jae-yun's eyebrows twitch. Certainly, there was nothing good about clashing with them in the current situation. If there were A and B, it was clear which one was A and which one was B. Kim Myung-hoon continued speaking, watching Choi Jae-yun shut his mouth. Do you know what the situation is now? What's the situation? At 2 o'clock, the blood wind will blow, won't it? Each of us has a shortage of numbers. Choi Jae-yun bit his lip at Kim Myung-hoon's words. I was thinking wrong. Someone must have collected the essence by hunting ignorantly. Someone else must have taken away the essence of the person who collected it that way. But Kim Myung-hoon thought of the next thing. Was he moving for this moment? For the past 70 hours, Kim Myung-hoon has gathered people. The last 2 hours, he had planned to sweep away the essence at the last moment, focusing on the fact that he had to pass through the gate to move on to the next tutorial. He's a smart guy after all. Choi Jae-yun glanced at Kim Myung-hoon's group. About 50 people. On the other hand, there were about 20 people traveling with him. There were also several small groups of 4 or 5 people who did not belong anywhere, but it was difficult to expect them to suddenly join forces. How many do you need? We have a lot of mouths to feed. We're short about 700. 700? It was too much. If it had been about 100, I would have thought about filling the target and avoiding a clash, but that wasn't possible now. We have a little less than 800 essence. It was a ridiculous demand. If we filled all 700, we wouldn't have any left. The conflict began within. And as the conflict was about to ignite, Kim Myung-hoon opened his mouth. Just fill 400, then we'll just pass. 400, yes, we'll take care of the rest. Blackmail to take away only half of what you have. But that alone was gamjadiokji. If we refuse here, it will be an all-out war. Choi Jae-yun looked around at the other people, including Dusik next to him. Then that was when it happened. Someone entered the safe zone. Excuse me for a moment. I'll pass. 2 men and women passed through the crowd and headed toward the middle of the safe zone. I thought it was brave to dig through the densely packed Kim Myung-hoon and his group. What are they doing? The face was familiar. I thought I had seen it once or twice. But it wasn't a face I remembered well. No, one was an exception. That guy is the man holding a large box in his hand. It was an unforgettable face. Short, 2-block black hair, sharp jawline, and dark eyes with clear focus. Woo Yun, a participant who had been active outside the safe zone in the second tutorial. Woo Yun's appearance briefly quieted the surroundings. The quarrel between Kim Myung-hoon and Choi Jae-won also came to a brief standstill. Woo Yun's presence was no different from the biggest joker card in this fight. There was no one in the Hongdae area who didn't know Woo Yun right now. Woo Yun had been going outside the safe zone since before the start of the third tutorial in hunting monsters. Woo Yun's appearance, stepping on and killing the worm that everyone feared in the second tutorial, was enough to stand out among the participants. Woo Yun walked into the middle of the safe zone and put down the box. The first person to greet Woo Yun, who had returned the furthest, was Kim Myung-hoon. I haven't seen you in a few days, where have you been? Woo Yun looked at Kim Myung-hoon, who had approached him. Kim Myung-hoon's expression, whose eyes met, was full of inexplicable murderous intent. The expression on Kim Myung-hoon's face, whose eyes met, was full of incomprehensible murderous intent. If you want to live, come in here with my permission. Now there was no more smiling face, and he was completely hostile to Yoo-won. What to do is obvious. So, have you gathered them all? That's obvious. Kim Myung-hoon nodded at Yoo-won's answer. It wasn't a particularly surprising story. He had known Yoo-won's skills since the first tutorial, and he had expected that it would not be difficult to collect essence through hunting. How many have you collected? Hey, wait a minute. At Kim Myung-hoon's question, the group behind him approached. Kim Myung-hoon turned his head. The other party had worried expressions. Let's not fight that guy for nothing. Do you know what level he is? That's right, let's not touch him for nothing. Yeah, Myung-hoon, I understand your feelings, but this is. Following the other party, even Sung Chan, a friend who had been with him from the beginning, dissuaded him, and Kim Myung-hoon's expression hardened. Are you scared of that guy right now? It's not that I'm scared, it's that I'm saying that I can take the essence from other guys. It's easier to deal with 2 other guys than that one guy, and you can get more essence, right? That's right, no matter how many, there will be 50, so why bother? It was true, the condition for passing the third tutorial is to collect 50 essence. It would be much easier to deal with a few other participants who had collected 30 or 40 than to deal with Yoo-won, who had collected 50 essence. If you think rationally, you should avoid unnecessary fights here. That was when Yoo-won turned the inventory bag he was holding upside down. KWA rarar. Thud, thud, thud. Quote exclamation mark quote. WH, what the hell? Numerous marbles poured out onto the large box. The small marble-sized essence that filled the box was enough to make the eyes of the participants watching turn upside down. No matter how little, there seemed to be over 1,000. It was an enormous number. In an instant, not only the safe zone, but also the people who were waiting for the gate to open far away paid attention to Yoo-won. One by one, people who had been keeping their distance gathered. Kim Myung-hoon asked, "Do you still think the same?" There was no answer. It couldn't be helped. No matter how strong Yoo-won was, he was only an individual. Not only did he have a much larger number of essence, but he couldn't help but judge that it would be better to turn Yoo-won into an enemy than to fight Choi Jae-won's group. Kim Myung-hoon's lips went up at the silence of the group. Okay, to be honest, he had no confidence in a one-on-one with Yoo-won. If it had been a fistfight, he wouldn't have known, but he already knew enough about Yoo-won's skills with a sword. However, that was only in the case of a one-on-one. He had nearly 50 people in his party, and that number would be too much for even Yoo-won to handle. He approached Yoo-won. "You've collected a lot." Kim Myung-hoon's eyes fell on the essence that Yoo-won had collected. The moment he took a step forward. "Look at the floor carefully." Yoo-won pointed down with his finger. Naturally, Kim Myung-ho's gaze followed his finger. Line. A line that appeared on the floor. When the line was drawn in a circle centered on Yu-won. As Yu-won stopped the approaching Kim Myung-hoon, he looked around at the greedy participants. Do you all need this? It was a desperate plea. The countless essence contained in the box right before his eyes was enough to catch the attention of the participants and stimulate their desperation. Yu-won knew their desperation. No one was here because they wanted to die. I don't need it. I already have more than enough. At Yu-won's words, someone nearby approached and shouted. Then let me. It's not free. Yu-won's voice cut him off in the middle. Then he raised his hand and put up one finger. 100 points for one. Yu-won said, pointing to the line drawn on the floor. If you want to live, get permission and come inside. Chapter 13. And if you were the only one to make a sacrifice, how many people here would be able to live? Isn't that too selfish? Huh, don't you think so? 100 points per vial. It wasn't a cheap price by any means. However, Yu-won was the only one selling potions that weren't even sold in the shop at the moment. What if I don't have any money? Yu-won's lips curled up at Kim Myung-hoon's shameless question. The method doesn't matter, as long as it's not post-paid. You can borrow from someone else, or sell an item you have to a broker, whatever. Sell an item? Is that possible? Those who were despairing over not having any points started to stir. Everyone had gone through tutorial 1 and 2, so they had a certain amount of points. Points meant power, and in tutorial 3, it wasn't easy to hunt without using points. Naturally, people had started hunting by using up their points, and most didn't have many points left. However, there was another way to get points. It doesn't matter if you sell an item or a stat, as long as you bring me points, I'll sell you potions. Despite Yu-won's words, people hesitated. Sell their items and stats to get points. If they did, they could get potions right away, but they would become weaker. Considering the next tutorial, losing points meant losing power. Rather than that, it would be better to just take it by force. Greed flickered in people's eyes. And in front of them was Kim Myung-hoon. You're kidding me. Yu-won looked at Kim Myung-hoon. He was looking at the potions in the box that Yu-won had gathered. You probably killed someone else who wasn't here and took them, and now you're going to sell them for money. Do you think the people here will accept that? What if I didn't take them? That's impossible. Like I said before, Yu-won, this is a world where the strong prey on the weak. Do you still think that people will trade the things they have for money? Yu-won nodded at Kim Myung-hoon's words. He was right. There was no law in this tutorial yet. Once they completed the tutorial and went up to the tower, they would have their own set of rules, but this tutorial was a lawless zone, at least for now. Kim Myung-hoon smiled and looked around at the people gathered around Yu-won. And if you sacrifice just yourself, how many people here can survive now? Isn't that too selfish? Huh, isn't it? People nodded one by one at his words. The number of essences that Yu-won possessed was easily over 1,000, even if one were to estimate it at its lowest. With that number, he could save more than half of the people present. If that happened, they wouldn't have to kill each other and fight to take what they had. Only one person, Yu-won, had to be sacrificed. You're funny. Kim Myung-hoon looked at the person who was laughing at his words. The woman who had walked with Yu-won. It was Ju Yeon. Killing and taking. Is that really something you should be saying right now? Who are you? You don't remember, do you? I refused when you asked me to join you, and you tried to kill me right away. Following Ju Yeon, Sung Chan stepped forward. And if Yu-won had been taking other people's essences like you said, he would have taken ours too. This is like a shit-covered dog calling a healthy person dirty. It's not even funny. Ah, you were them. Kim Myung-hoon chuckled. He remembered. He didn't know their names, but he remembered offering to join a party of 5. They seemed friendly, but they refused to join him because they were wary of strangers. So he tried to kill them. He killed 2 of them, but he missed the 3rd one by mistake. So what? What are the 3 of you going to do about it? Kim Myung-hoon raised his hand. At that, the many people around him moved. Growl. 50 people surrounded Yu-won. Kim Myung-hoon had a triumphant expression. No matter how good he is with a sword, what can he do alone? He was running around trying to survive, and this is where he ended up. You don't know anything about this man. You're talking nonsense. Kim Myung-hoon lowered his raised hand. Kill them all. Clang, crash, dozens of people pulled out weapons such as spears and swords and began to charge at Yu-won. And at that moment, line, creak, Yu-won rose from his seat. It's over, screech. A fountain of blood erupted. Kim Myung-hoon didn't understand what had happened for a moment. What the hell just happened? Thinking froze at the sight of the blood that spurted upwards and then fell back down. That definitely wasn't Yuan's blood. The people who charged forward to kill Yuan. Their necks had been sliced and blood spurted out. At that moment, Yuan's words came to Kim Ming-hoon's mind. Don't cross the line. It was what Yuan had said when the third tutorial started. He had laughed at it back then, thinking what a kind and naive thing to say. But that wasn't it. Could that line be? He got chills. Was he thinking of a situation like this ever since then? While he wondered for a brief moment, the group that was charging towards Yuan stopped moving. What's wrong with that bastard? What the hell did he do? They were people who would swing their swords even against monsters. But they couldn't even see how Yuan moved properly, and the necks of the ones who crossed the line were sliced like bamboo. They couldn't help but be scared of charging forward. You're right. Yuan looked at the people who had fallen to the ground. Less than 20 minutes remained until the gate was activated. Now, almost everyone had gathered around this place. This place is survival of the fittest. There are no laws or rules. That's why it's a place where protecting something is harder than obtaining it. Yuan, who said that, reached into the box that he had placed on the ground and took out a few crystals. The conditions are the same as before. Yuan continued speaking. 100 points for one. If you pay the proper price, I won't sell the crystals. Those who want to live, come inside after getting permission. I have confidence that I can protect this. Thump. Kim Ming-hoon gritted his teeth. So many people were scared of just one person. He couldn't accept that fact, and he was filled with anger at the fact that he was scared of Yuan. What will you do if I don't? If you don't want to, then you don't have to buy it. I'm not forcing you, but if you come over here without any intention of buying it. Yuan looked at the corpses that were lying on the ground. You will all die. Damn it, what the hell are you doing? Go kill him. Kill that bastard, now. Kim Ming-hoon shouted as if he was having a tantrum. It seemed like he had been keeping the group under control pretty well. The first person to move was his friend, Lee Ji-hoon. And starting with Lee Ji-hoon, the group began to move towards Yuan once again. And starting with Lee Ji-hoon, the group began to move towards Yuan once more. No matter how many low-level users, in the dozens or hundreds, attacked a being with a high level, good items, and stats, they would be helpless. Yuan shrugged. I kind of needed this to happen anyway. He had expected something like this to happen. This place was where everyone gathered to steal each other's essence. Naturally, there were bound to be more people who would try to forcibly take it than those who would pay points to buy it. The third tutorial, the most important thing to do on this stage, where one could gain the most points within the tutorial, was not to collect a lot of essence but to protect it. And in order to do that, lower grade magic sword is activated. He needed to show them, for sure, the power of an individual, crushing a group. Squeak, thud, thud, a severed head flew up into the air and fell to the ground. Along with the head that had been cut off in an instant, the inventory pouch he had been carrying also disappeared. Naturally, the dozens of essence inside it also vanished with it. Kim Myung-hoon's party, who had been running towards them eagerly, hesitated. This was an opponent they couldn't possibly face. Thud, drip, thud, thud, the severed heads that had fallen to the ground rolled around. The blood from Yuan's sword dripped to the ground, and the area around the circle Yuan had drawn was soon filled with blood. More than 20 people had already died. Kim Myung-hoon's spine chilled. What the hell is this? He couldn't believe it even though he was seeing it with his own eyes. He was cutting their necks while simultaneously dodging the swords that were stabbing him from behind and the sides. He couldn't even see how he was swinging his sword or how he was moving properly. An individual defeating dozens of people. He thought such a thing only happened in movies or comics. But it was unfolding right before his eyes. I forgot. Level 11, that was his current level. What kind of world this is? In the world Kim Myung-hoon had lived in until now, strength was in fists. As he became an adult and entered a slightly wider world, Kim Myung-hoon came to know the power that a group possessed. No, maybe he had known it for quite a long time. Because no matter how strong an individual was, it was impossible to overcome the power of the many. It was a fact he had known since he was a little kid, a long time ago. But this world was different. A world where levels, stats, items, and skills existed. This world was like a game. High-level existences with good items and stats are invincible no matter how many tens or hundreds of low-level users attack them. What the hell? Thud. Kim Myung-hoon involuntarily backed away from Woo-won. At this point, no one dared to attack Woo-won. They couldn't win. Even if it was just one person, their builds were different from the beginning. No matter how many hunting dogs you release, it's impossible to take down a dinosaur. He had to run away. The moment that thought dominated his mind. The line drawn around Wu Wan became visible. It was blurry, soaked in blood, but one thing was for sure. Since the fight began, Wu Wan had not taken a single step outside that line. It's clear that only those who came inside that line died. The bodies strewn across the floor were proof of that. Wu Wan mercilessly cut down anyone who crossed the line, even by a step. On the other hand, he didn't bother moving to touch anyone outside of it. A sense of relief washed over him. I'm alive, at least he hadn't stepped inside that line. If you step inside the line, I'll kill you. That meant, if you don't step inside, I won't kill you. Crash, quote. Kim Myung-hoon looked up. Drip, blood ran down his forehead. He raised his hand to touch his forehead, and the spot where his forehead should have been was empty. Time seemed to freeze. In the slowly passing time, Kim Myung-hoon looked at Wu Wan. Wu Wan was definitely still inside that circle. What the hell happened? His thoughts didn't continue any further. His body swayed, and his vision of Wu Wan flipped upside down. The sky and the ground turned upside down, and the world looked hazy. That was when the strength supporting his body drained away. Thud, Kim Myung-hoon collapsed to the floor. Before losing consciousness, Kim Myung-hoon barely managed to lift his head halfway and saw it clearly. In his blurring vision, did you think you'd be okay if you stayed there? Step. The footsteps came a step closer. Wu Wan looked around and curled his lips. I've seen all your faces. Wu Wan stepped outside the circle. Chapter 14. Choi Jae-won couldn't believe the sight before his eyes. Is this possible? Wu Yun didn't move much. At first, he stood inside the circle and took turns cutting down those who entered it. Then, the moment Wu Yun came out. Spare me, Og. Those who were about to attack Wu Yun turned and started to run away. It was useless. Whatever his agility stat was, Wu Yun ran up to them in one step and slit their throats. He had killed about 10 more people when someone who wasn't afraid appeared and touched Wu Yun's essence. Screech. Og. Wu Yun ran up to him without hesitation and cut off his arm. It was pandemonium, a massacre by a single person. It was unbelievable. Numbers didn't matter. Choi Jae-won thought he had adapted quite well to this world. His basic stats were quite high to begin with, and he was proud of the fact that he had leveled up quickly through hunting and was ahead of others. He was wrong. He had thought that an individual could not defeat the majority, and he still did not understand this world properly. Thud. Wu Yun's sword pierced the heart of the man who had crossed the line. That was the end of it. The end of Wu Yun's massacre of the enemies, who had drawn their swords at him and rushed to steal his essence. It's a mess. Wu Yun picked up the box. Then he began to move, carrying the box without hesitation. Thud, thud. Wu Yun walked towards the gate without hesitation, stepping on the blood that was flowing on the floor. As if he had thought of that place from the beginning. 2 hours 4 minutes and 18 seconds. There wasn't much time left. Wu Yun settled down again and drew a circle on the floor. The place where Wu Yun settled down was right in front of the gate. Buzz, buzz. The gate began to ring. People became more agitated as the transparent gate began to activate. No one thought of attacking Wu Yun anymore. If it's in front of me, I can move on to the next one right after purchasing the essence. I have 43, so if I have 700 points. What do? I only have 200 points now. Their minds became complicated, and people began to look at each other's faces. And then, I'll buy it. Choi Jae-won stepped forward. Then, the surprised Du-shik blocked Choi Jae-won's way. Hung, why, are you really going to buy it? Where do you have the points, Hung? I asked the errand boy earlier. He said he'd give me 500 points if I sold this. Choi Jae-won shook the weapon in his hand. It was an expensive item among the weapons that Choi Jae-won could buy in the store, purchased for 1,000 points. He hadn't even used it for a few days, but its price had dropped by half. Even so, think carefully, Du-shik. Yes. If you try to kill someone here and take their essence, what will happen? Du-shik looked puzzled at Choi Jae-won's words. Choi Jae-won sighed in frustration and lowered his voice. What that guy has, he didn't take it from anyone. He got it all from hunting. How do you know that? How many monsters do you think he would have had to hunt to get that strong? Du-shik became speechless at Choi Jae-won's question. He couldn't imagine it. How many monsters would he have to hunt to become that strong? How many monsters had Wu Yun hunted in the past 3 days? Now he understood how Wu Yun had been able to collect so many essences. It was because he had hunted so many monsters and leveled up. And that guy, Choi Jae-won drew a circle in front of the gate to trade and looked at Yuan, who was waiting for him. I could have done it easily, but I didn't take the stuff from those guys I just killed. It was because of principle. The way Yuan was acting now meant that there was no point in taking and selling other people's stuff. If he did that, it would no longer be a trade, but a robbery. In order to persuade the remaining people to sell their soul stones, Yuan couldn't take the soul stones that other people had gathered. And just now, Yuan had shown his skills and proven that the soul stones he had gathered were all from hunting. If I kill someone here first and take their stuff, I'll become a target. He thought this tutorial was a lawless place. No. No matter how much law disappeared from the world, there could be no true lawless place. Wherever there were 3 or more people, some kind of law and order was bound to be created. The laws and rules of this world are made by the strong. And at this moment, Yuan was that strong. Thud, thud. Choi Jae-won approached Yuan. Yuan didn't make a move. Choi Jae-won, who had expressed his intention to buy the soul stones, held out his hand to Yuan. Please. 7. Yuan nodded and took Choi Jae-won's hand. 700 points have been acquired. The first transaction was made. Yuan took 7 soul stones out of his box and handed them to Choi Jae-won. Choi Jae-won, who had collected 50 soul stones, crossed the gate. After that, me too, I'll take 7. I'll take 10. Does anyone have any points left? I'll pay you back in the next tutorial. Yuan's surroundings became a marketplace. 700 points have been acquired. 400 points have been acquired. 1100 points have been acquired. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. Yuan counted the soul stones in the box and handed them over. People were busy calling their errand boys to sell the items they had purchased. 100 points for 1 stat. Wait a minute. 3 points for senses. That's 300 points, right? Yuan watched the transactions of the errand boys that appeared around him while selling the soul stones. Among the functions of the shop available to the participants of the tutorial was the resell function. It was a function that allowed one to resell used items back to the shop to replenish the points spent. The errand boys would then sell these repurchased items to the participants of the next tutorial. It was a kind of cycle. However, any participant with a little sense would rarely use this function. That was because most of the errand boys were complete rascals. The item is slightly damaged. I'll give you 300 points. That item is actually not very popular. I can't give you more than 200 points. What? How can that be? Isn't this a scam? The participants were disgusted by the prices offered by the errand boys. This was because items originally purchased for 1,000 points were being resold for 3,400 points, or offered for less than 200 points. The errand boys were thorough businessmen. The participants who used the shop to survive, the errand boys traded their very lives as collateral. A thorough relationship between A and B. Participants who were desperate for points had no choice but to sell their stats instead of items to earn points. But, 100 points for 1 stat. That deal was the real definition of a rip-off. A totally bad deal. Stats were inherently more valuable than points in the long run. There were items with various abilities available in the shop that could be purchased with points, but no matter how many points one had, they could not be used to purchase stats. However, on the other hand, the errand boys bought the stats of the tutorial participants with points. And they did so quite cheaply. I guess it's not a big problem since I'm not lacking in sensory stats or stamina right now, though. It was quite a loss in the long run. As soon as I climb a few floors of the tower, I'll realize how precious those few stats I lost in the beginning were. But it's better than dying here. Yuan checked the remaining number of essences. Those who found out that they could sell their stats were competing to buy essences. Over 50 people had already completed the tutorial 3 times and gone outside. Excuse me, can I have 24 of those? He was quite a big customer. Yuan looked at the guest who had come to visit. A young boy in his mid-teens. He didn't have any weapons, and judging by the small number of essences he had collected, his level must have been low. This guy is screwed. He had no items and his stats were terrible. Originally, he should have died without even being able to pass the tutorial 3 times. Furthermore, since he had sold all of his stats to barely get points, his poor stats would only become a heavier burden. Here you go. The sale went smoothly. To the end, continue. Points in possession, 167,400. After checking his points, Yuan nodded. It was a much larger number than he had originally expected. It was the result of combining the points he had earned from killing the mind worm in the second tutorial with the points he had earned from selling essences. I thought I'd be lucky to get about 100,000 by the end of the third one. So far, the tutorial had been going better than expected. 160,000 points. This amount of points was a considerable amount of money even in the tower. This was not something that could be obtained from the tutorial in the first place. It's possible. Yuan rose from his seat. Then, Juan, who had been waiting next to him, asked. Are you leaving now? Yuan turned his head and looked at her. Sungchan was next to her. Both of them were waiting for Yuan. Why aren't you going? I want to go with you. Juan and Sungchan had been with Yuan for a day. Yuan shook his head. There was no room for hesitation. I don't plan on getting any colleagues here. You don't have to think of us as colleagues. It's enough if you just use us as disposable pawns, like this time. If I think you're useless, I'll just throw you away. Calling themselves disposable pawns. It was not an easy decision. Yuan chuckled. It was true that he had benefited a little from the two of them during this hunt. However, that didn't mean that these two could walk the path he was going to take. There's no way. There were very few humans who could walk with Yuan. Unless they had some talent, it was impossible to even follow Yuan, let alone walk with him. Naturally, the Juan and Sungchan in front of him were the same. The two of them might have been able to somehow pass the tutorial and reach the tower, but that was as far as they could go. The place Yuan wanted to reach was the top of the tower, or perhaps even higher than that. Unfortunately, this is as far as it goes. But I said the same thing to the guy who died earlier, don't rely on anyone. You won't last long if you do. At Yuan's words, Juan and Sungchan looked regretful. Of course, they had expected it. However, they couldn't help but feel sorry since they had still had a little bit of hope. Yuan shrugged at the two people's expressions and said. And even if you wanted to go with me, you can't. I'm not going. What, you're not going? As if to ask what he meant, Juan and Sungchan looked puzzled. Yuan turned his inventory pouch inside out. Not a speck of dust fell from the inventory. I have nothing left. Chapter 15, Thud. As if he no longer needed it, Wu Jin dropped the inventory pouch on the floor. Surprised, Zhu Yian picked up the inventory pouch that Wu Jin had dropped and looked inside. Nothing came out of the pouch. Is it real? Zhu Yian and Sung Chan, who thought that he would have put aside his own share, were very surprised. What are you going to do? You should have kept 50. Wu Jin shrugged. I'm not going. At Wu Jin's repeated words, the two realized. What Wu Jin meant by not going was that he had no intention of moving on to the next tutorial. What the hell are you going to do? If we stay here. There was nothing else to say. Wu Jin looked alternately at the empty box and the people who had not been able to buy essence from Wu Jin until the end. So hurry up and move on. This place is going to be a battlefield soon. At Wu Jin's words, Zhu Yian and Sung Chan hesitated for a moment before crossing the gate. Wu Jin, who had closed shop, got up and stretched. Checking the time, he saw that about 1 hour and 30 minutes remained. The next tutorial was defense, wasn't it? The tutorial wasn't a tutorial for nothing. Compared to the various missions one would have to go through to climb the tower, the tutorial had a fairly simple structure. The first was survival, the second was competition. The third was hunting, and the fourth was defense. There will probably be quite a few people coming over from this side. The next tutorial won't be that difficult. And the structure of that fourth tutorial was such that the more participants there were, the more advantageous it would be. Although his stats would have dropped by a few because he had bought essence, the difficulty would not be difficult since the number was the number. Excuse me, is all the essence sold out? Despite the obvious, someone approached Wu Jin and asked. He was a middle-aged man with small glasses. Wu Jin nodded. I'm all out of business. At Wu Jin's reply, the man slumped down. So did the others. Wu Jin watched them for a while and then got up. There was no reason to be here anymore. It's about to start. The number of people remaining was about 20. They would probably attack each other and try to take each other's essence. Half of them would survive, and half of them would die. Wu Jin had no intention of intervening in the fight and deciding their life or death. Wu Jin stepped aside. As the giant in the middle of the crowd disappeared, people began to move one by one. He had no time to pay attention to them. About an hour remained. Shop, creak. At Wu Jin's words, a crack appeared in the void. The phenomenon that occurred when the tutorial errand boy appeared. However, the crack was much larger than Wu Jin had expected. Rumble, crack, crackle, no way was the truth. What appeared from the large crack was a familiar, burly beggar. It was the tutorial manager. Did you call? I didn't call you. What Wu Jin needed was a store. And for that, he needed the help of an errand boy. In the tower, it might be different, but in this tutorial, it was impossible to use the store without the help of an errand boy. Where did the errand boy go, and why did you come? We're picking out new ones, because we're a little short on manpower. We still have to reduce it more. Did you cut out a lot? 1 out of 3 of those bastards was involved. They ate a lot, they did. The manager had not been involved in the tutorial for a long time after leaving the management to the errand boys. However, this incident would probably cause the manager to run around on his own for quite a while. And thanks to you, a lot of kids are spending a lot of time here. The progress on the other side is a bit slow. Why is that my fault? Because over 100 people use the store at the same time to trade with you. It wasn't a lie, it was not very common for the survivors in one area to use the store at the same time. Especially the Hongdae area where Wu Jin was located had a lot of survivors compared to other areas. However, it wasn't unusual for the many survivors to use the shop at the same time, as there was a shortage of errand runners. Isn't that a good thing? It means business is good. Yeah, that's true, but is there really such a shortage of manpower? Why are you personally coming out to operate a shop? Even if there was a shortage of manpower, the administrator was the general manager of this tutorial. Using the shop was a job for errand runners, who were at the bottom of the hierarchy. It was strange for the administrator to appear in person, as it wasn't a particularly special task. It's not just a shop. Then what is it? Do you really not know what kind of position you're in right now? At the administrator's words, Yu-won thought for a moment before nodding his head. Special subject of management, that was probably his current position. A special subject of management meant a participant who stood out and exhibited unusual behavior within the tutorial. If they can't figure it out on their own, they usually just pass. It seemed that the administrator hadn't simply passed over Yu-won's existence. It was natural to be suspicious. Especially now. 160,000 points at the end of the 3rd tutorial. Your level is one thing, but this is enough power to destroy the tutorial's ecosystem. In this world, points were almost like power. Even if your level was low, you could make up for the power gap with high-level items and skills using points. Usually, participants would earn between 1,000 and 3,000 points by the end of the 3rd tutorial. However, in the process, they would use the shop to buy items in order to survive, and once they passed level 20, they would buy skills again. Normally, the points given in the tutorial should be insufficient. That's how they could differentiate between those who were qualified to go to the tower and those who were not. However, the points that Yu-won had were far from those of other participants. To use a game analogy, it was like cheating. The bigger problem was that Yu-won's level was also much higher than that of the tutorial participants at a similar time. That's right, Yu-won nodded. That's what I want. What? That's why it won't be a problem. This is the path I have to take. Quote. The administrator was momentarily speechless at his confident words. He was going to destroy the ecosystem of this tutorial. That's what Yu-won wanted. I've been managing this tutorial for a long time, but you're the first person like you. I'll take that as a compliment. Yu-won checked the time. While he had been talking with the administrator, 10 minutes had already passed. I'd like to use the shop. There was no more time for conversation. Participants who wanted to use the shop. No matter how much the administrator was the manager of this tutorial, he couldn't refuse Yu-won's request, as long as the tower's laws existed. Tell me what you need. The administrator held out his hand towards Yu-won. As his palm, which was as big as a head, opened, a list of items from the shop spread out before Yu-won's eyes. Yu-won looked through the list of items in the shop. So this is the limit of items that can be purchased in the tutorial. After looking through the shop for 30 minutes, Yu-won nodded his head. As expected of a tutorial area, the shop didn't have many of the skills or items that Yu-won knew. He had looked through the general composition. He had a rough idea of what to buy. First of all, Yu-won pointed his finger in one direction. I'll take this. 10,000 points have been consumed. You have obtained the intermediate exclusive inventory. You can activate the item using the inventory command. A whopping 10,000 points. It wasn't a very large amount compared to the money Yu-won had right now, but it wasn't a point that could be obtained in the tutorial area. Even though he had purchased the item, nothing changed except that the points had been consumed. An exclusive inventory was more of a convenient bag for storing items than an item that was visible to the eye. Next, Yu-won flipped through the list and selected the next item. I'll buy the Jade Iron Sword. 50,000 points have been consumed. Glacier Iron Sword, acquired. Swish, an object appeared in Yu-won's hand. It was a pure white sword. A sword worth a whopping 50,000 points. It was the first proper item he had bought, but Yu-won's next action wasn't to get a good grip on it. Open inventory. Yu-won hurriedly put the sword in his inventory. The glacier iron sword disappeared into thin air. The exclusive inventory had enough volume to store several items Yu-won wanted. Glacier iron sword, you've chosen quite a difficult item. The administrator narrowed his eyes and looked at Yu-won. It was a meaningful gaze. Yu-won shrugged his shoulders. The shopping continued. Fire magic clothes. And the anti-magic shield. 60,000 points have been consumed. Fire magic clothes acquired. 20,000 points have been consumed. Anti-magic shield, acquired. A red silk robe and a blue-tinted round shield appeared above Yu-won's head. Yu-won put on the robe and held the shield in his hand. A total of 140,000 points. They were quite expensive items. Items worth tens of thousands of points could be used even on quite high floors of the tower. In other words, they were items that could disrupt the ecosystem of the tutorial. And 4 ice crystals, 20,000 points have been consumed. 4 feet ice crystals, acquired. 4 marbles appeared in Yu-won's hand. The marbles, which were the size of his finger joints, were pure white in color, just like the glacier iron sword. Yu-won put them in his inventory pouch as well. Now, all that remained was 7,000 points. Lastly, I'd like one well-sharpened sword, please. 2,000 points have been consumed. Well-sharpened sword, acquired. A fairly fancy sword with a black handle appeared in Yu-won's hand. It was an ordinary sword. A sword with no special features other than the fact that it was well sharpened and had excellent durability. Even so, the reason this sword cost 2,000 points was because it focused on sharpness and durability. It's a sword that's most faithful to the basics. It's the opposite of other items that are decorated with magical abilities. I like it quite a bit. Yu-won wore the red robe and lightly swung the sword. It was a sword that fit well in his hand. Its mana conductivity didn't seem too bad either. Well, it was natural for an item worth 2,000 points to have basic mana conductivity. With this, no one will be able to touch you. The tutorial participants won't be able to pierce through that outfit. The administrator who said that smiled meaningfully, the corners of his mouth raised. If they're participants, that is. Yu-won didn't say anything. The administrator stared at Yu-won for a while before turning around and walking towards the crack. I'll be waiting. Creak. The crack swallowed the administrator again. The transaction with the administrator ended with that. Before he disappeared, Yu-won recalled the administrator's expression and words. Did he notice? Well, it would be strange if a being like the administrator didn't know what Yu-won's actions meant. It doesn't matter. For the remaining time, Yu-won sat down and took a short break. From now on, it was important to manage his condition even a little bit. How much time passed like that? Tick. The second hand ticked. It was a cruel sound indeed. The tutorial, which had a time limit, always tormented the participants with the sound of the ticking clock just before it ended. Now, 10 seconds remained. Yu-won raised his head and looked up at the sky. It started. It was finally the moment he had been waiting for. Tutorial 3 has ended. You have failed the tutorial. Annihilation will begin in this area. Chapter 16. The gate leading to the 4th tutorial had disappeared. And that wasn't all. The monsters that had been scattered everywhere had also disappeared. The unknown giant plants that had been wrapped around the buildings and the strangely shaped structures of the buildings had all returned to their original state. There was something that hadn't changed. It was the invisible, giant barrier that divided the areas. However, the biggest change of all was the sky. It's been a long time. The sky had turned red. In an instant, the weather had become warm. Fortunately, it didn't feel any hotter than it should have been. Yu-won checked the effect of the item he was wearing. Clothes of pyromancy. Hash clothes enchanted with ancient sorcery. Made of special material. Hash does not burn. Hash strong resistance to the fire attribute. Hash increased magic resistance. The description itself wasn't very long. For an item worth 60,000 points, the description was quite short. Strong resistance, huh. However, anyone who knew how to properly read an item's description would never think of this item as short. It's not a bad item. There were countless items in the tower. The number of items was uncountable, and among the countless items, only a few were well known. That meant that there were many types of items, but not many items with proven value. And Yu-won had seen countless items among those many items, at the very top. Of course, the clothes of pyromancy wasn't an item that could be compared to those items. However, the clothes of pyromancy had strong resistance to a specific attribute. At this level, it would be a fairly strong defensive item against fire when climbing the tower. It's an item that's too good to use in the tutorial. It wouldn't be difficult to protect his body from this level of heat. Of course, Yu-won wasn't the only one protected from the heat. It's hot. This is the end. Save me, please save me. Loud screams and shouts could be heard from afar. Yu-won turned his head in the direction of the sound. There are 3 survivors. There were 3 voices and movements. The reason those 2 were left here was probably because they didn't have 50 essence even when they combined their essence. Perhaps they gave all the souls they had to others to survive right now. Yu-won walked toward the 3 people. He couldn't feel the heat, but he could tell. This place was getting hotter and hotter. Why didn't you move on to the next one? The 3 people who found Yu-won looked surprised. No one expected Yu-won to fail the next tutorial, except for the other person. It couldn't be helped. Yu-won was strong enough to gather more than 1,000 souls, not just 50. Yu-won glanced at the people approaching him. They were looking at Yu-won with faces that wanted something from him. Begging him to save them. It was no use. Sweat was already pouring down their bodies. Their bodies were not able to withstand the hot weather. At that level, they're not much different from ordinary people. This level of heat was not difficult. It was an abnormal heat of close to 60 degrees, but if their stamina stat was just a little higher, they would be able to endure it without much difficulty. However, they were sweating as if they were about to collapse at any moment. It meant that their stamina stat was less than 15. There was a reason why they were eliminated and left behind. Has it begun? Yu-won looked up at the sky. The sky, which had turned bright red. The air was no longer getting hotter, but the destruction had already begun. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The ground shook. The hot weather had reached its peak. It's hot. The ground. Crack, sizzle. Flames rose through the cracked ground. Blaze, flutter. Hot. The heat kept rising. Eventually, one of the men caught fire. The woman next to him, who might have been his lover or friend, was the same. Save me, please, save me. The 3 reached out to Yu-won. Yu-won thought of the ice stone in his inventory. Could he save them using the ice stone? He thought for a moment. Blaze, flicker, flicker. The flames rising from the ground were shallow, but they were too much for ordinary people to handle. The flames engulfed the 3 in an instant. Yu-won shook his head. As he moved his gaze a little, he saw the world that had changed in an instant. There was no place to run. The ground was ablaze in red flames. But this world couldn't be called ruin just because of this. Ruin, the 176th giant, begins. Crack, creak. Boom, a slender hand stretched out through the cracked floor. A hand with flesh melting and burning. The being climbed out of the ground with great effort and revealed its form. Clatter, clack, a skeleton with almost no flesh walking around. The being wore clothes made of fire and held a torch in its hand. A low-grade demon, skull. There wasn't just one. Clatter, clack, from all over the cracked ground, fearsome bones and flames rose up. Hundreds, thousands of skulls revealed their forms. There's so many. Yu-won muttered at the countless number. Low-grade demons weren't really beings that could be called demons. To be exact, they were closer to being servants of demons rather than demons themselves. That was why they were given the name, low-grade. Demons were one of the dominant species that ruled the tower along with the gods, giants, and dragons in this giant tower. Of course, it was ridiculous for such a demon to appear in the tutorial. That was why they were called ruin. Low-grade demon, Surtra, reveals itself. Woo, the ground he was standing on shook. The skulls that had revealed themselves on the ground stopped moving and looked to one side. They were paying homage to the low-grade demons. That meant one thing. The real thing has come out. You might think that it was just a low-grade demon. But a demon was a demon no matter what. Especially if it was the 176th that Yu-won knew, it was a being that could easily kill a dragon like heckling. You weren't this small when it was Ragnarok. Boom. A giant hand rose up from the flames of the ground that was like lava. Yu-won smiled in delight as he looked at the being that had turned everything into hell just by appearing. I see you here, Surtra. Surtur's 176th child. He had seen it before during the myth of ruin, Ragnarok. Surtur was the main character who led the destruction of Asgard. Surtur had hundreds of children. Some of them were born as giants and lived the lives of humans, and some climbed the tower and became rankers. The Surtur before his eyes was the case where he had become a demon. A being who was born as a giant and became a lower demon. Although he looks like that now, Surtur at the time of Ragnarok had a size like a mountain. It's only as big as a large house now. Goo. A huge sword blazing with flames. A face that has turned into a skull and a body as red as lava flowing. Surtur stood arrogantly and looked up at the sky. He was the destruction that appeared in this tutorial area. Another world is being eaten by the tower. Surtur looked as if he was immersed in emotion somewhere. As the flames rippled, the words he uttered were filled with hot emotions such as anger and hatred. He was the 100th child, so he was weak among Surtur's children, but he was the child who resembled Surtur the most in terms of appearance and characteristics. If it's a world that will burn and disappear like this, it shouldn't have been born in the first place. Hey, Surtur. Surtur's head turned. Compared to Surtur, who was as big as a house, Yuan was as small as a mouse. Surtur made an unpleasant expression at Yuan, who had broken his impression. Stop it and let's get started quickly. It's not menopause, and what's the point of being so impressed with the 176th subject? Surtur bowed his head and looked at Yuan. Surtur, who examined Yuan a little closer, soon made a surprised expression. He has the same eyes as that guy. It was easy to tell who he was talking about. Yuan's eyes were now the eyes of the baboon skill he had acquired from the errand. The corners of Surtur's lips curled up. Perhaps he was reminded of the old days. Will you be able to escape from this place too? Goo. The cracked ground rose up, and a huge chair blazing with flames was created. Surtur used magic to create a throne for himself to sit on. He sat high and watched Yuan fight. A demon sitting high up. Surtur raised the sword in his hand high. Waruruk, Kadak, Kakad. From all sides, dead demons and skulls began to approach. The moment the distance became so close. Shuak. Juk. The new item in Yuan's hand, the well-sharpened sword, crushed the skull's head. That moment, boom, the skull's body exploded, and black flames engulfed Yuan. Surtur let out a gasp as he watched Yuan cut down a skull in one breath. The smoke from the explosion cleared, and Yuan's figure was revealed. Hiss. Yuan's body was not burning. For an ordinary person, it would not have been strange for their entire body to turn black and collapse from an explosion like that. However, Yuan's level and physical strength had already reached a superhuman level for an ordinary person. Above all, the effect of the item could not be ignored. Clothing of pyromancy offsets the heat from the skull. Clothing of pyromancy gains additional resistance to fire attribute attacks. Clothing of pyromancy. This clothing was an item that would be quite useful not only in the tutorial but also on the middle floors of the tower. Naturally, the flames of a low-level demon like a skull couldn't deal any real damage to Yuan. These aren't ordinary clothes. Surtur also recognized the clothes Yuan was wearing. An item with strong resistance to fire. Did you prepare to catch me? Yuan shrugged at Surtur's question. It's good for the situation. Yuan looked around at the skulls surrounding him. The skull's explosion was only a little stinging. He didn't avoid it this time to see how much resistance the clothing of pyromancy had, but it wasn't good for the damage to accumulate. The skull's movements weren't very agile. Maybe it was because they didn't wield magic swords, but they were closer to shattering than being cut, but their defense wasn't that high either. Skulls were demonic minions that had fire attribute mana wrapped around their bodies. Aside from the fact that they had hot flames wrapped around their bodies, they weren't very dangerous. I won't run away, Surtur. Yuan turned up the corners of his mouth and looked at Surtur, who was sitting on a high throne surrounded by skulls. He wouldn't run away. That guy had only survived here, but that wasn't enough. The tip of Yuan's sword slowly rose and pointed at Surtur. I'm going to hunt you. Chapter 17. Surtur looked at the tip of Yuan's sword. Because of that fiery rage, the skulls, the servants of Surtur, did not move. You want to hunt me? Ooh hong. The sky, which had turned red with Surtur's anger, shook. The earth became hotter, and flames erupted from the cracked ground. No matter how weak he was compared to the time of Ragnarok, he was a descendant of a giant and a devil. This was the one who led the destruction of this world. This was the power that Surtur possessed. What arrogant and presumptuous words. Despite his anger, Surtur did not come down from his throne. He was still looking down at Yuan with his chin up. You should say that after you come here, young human. Clack, clack, clatter. The skulls began to move. It meant that Surtur, who had calmed down his anger, had started to move his servants again. Yuan scratched his head as if he had expected it. As expected, Surtur wouldn't move with this level of provocation. I knew you were a pain in the ass. Surtur was a rare demon who could control his anger. The 176th child of Surt. Among Surt's children, who became weaker as the number increased. He was not very strong. Nevertheless, there was one reason why Surtra was known to be dangerous. He only showed up on battlefields where he would always win, and he never came forward in fights he couldn't win. He was quite a cautious character. Let's see how much longer you can hold out. His personality was the same this time. If Yuan didn't have the flame-repelling clothes, Surtra would have judged that Yuan was a bit tricky. Now it couldn't be helped. You talk too much. I had no choice but to go there myself. Boom. Yuan rolled his foot lightly. The skulls filled his vision. Clack, clack, whoosh. Yuan jumped high into the middle of them. Swish. Yuan's body spun around in a large circle. He put his weight on the tip of his sword and swung it like a spinning top. Zeezing. 6 skulls were cut in an instant. Bang, pop, pop, pop. A series of explosions followed. Yuan's body was covered in smoke once again with the explosion. Boom. Yuan's body flew up with a large shield in the midst of the smoke. Magic Nullification Shield. A shield with excellent resistance to magical abilities. It cost a whopping 20,000 points. Yuan had purchased not only the pyromancy outfit for this fight but also a shield to hold and protect his body. The explosive power of the skulls wasn't that deadly. It was an explosion that would have been fatal if he had been hit a few times, but the effect of the item protected Yuan's body well. However, even clothes get wet in a drizzle. If the damage continued to accumulate due to the continuous battle, his body would inevitably be damaged, and he needed other means of defense besides the pyromancy outfit. Bam! Level has risen. Agility has increased by 1. Health has increased by 1. Magic power has increased by 1. It was always a pleasant message to hear. He had already gained 3 levels in the 2 hours of battle. The distribution of stats wasn't bad either. Both health, which was the most needed stat in the current battle, and magic power, the most difficult stat to raise, had increased. In the first place, since the monsters called skulls were upper-level monsters that could not be seen in the tutorial, the amount of experience gained was bound to be high. Phew, Yuan let out a long breath. Thanks to the increase in health, his breathing became a little easier, but as he continued to inhale the hot air, his body felt warm. It had already been 2 hours. The skulls' attack power wasn't that great, but the explosions that occurred when they died were quite threatening. The damage wasn't great. The problem was that there was no way to avoid it. Unless I use a long-range interception method, there's no way to block these explosions except with my body. Yuan's battle style was to jump into the middle of the battlefield. He could use mana blast, but its mana consumption was still too high. It was a burdensome method for Yuan, who had to think about the long battle. The shield. Crack. A crack appeared in the magic nullification shield. It was time to repair it. It's almost at its limit. The number of skulls that Yuan had hunted during the 2 hours was close to 1,000. After withstanding the explosions of so many skulls, it was no wonder that his shield was giving out. Hey, Surtur! Looking at the significantly reduced number of skulls, Yuan called out to Surtur for the first time in 2 hours. Aren't you coming down? Stop sending out your lackeys. At Yuan's words, a red vein pulsed on Surtur's forehead. The distance between the two had noticeably shortened. Now, Yuan could reach him in an instant if he wanted to. Surtur released the arm that was supporting his chin and stood up. Indeed, those are some amazing items. Wong. Surtur's body floated up. In the next moment, Surtur's gigantic body, which had been floating high up, landed in front of Yuan's eyes. Kuwang. In an instant, it felt as if the ground was shaking. Surtur, who had gotten off his throne and landed on the ground, had a gigantic sword that was as long as his body slung over his shoulder. I wonder how you got such things in the tutorial area. Yuan, who was facing Surtur, felt a completely different pressure than before. The already warm air around them became even hotter. It felt hot enough to penetrate the fire-resistant clothing he was wearing. As expected of Surtur's child. That goes for you too. Do you think you can just run wild in the tutorial area and get away with it? It is merely a punishment for those who are unqualified. But it is strange. Goo 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 goo. Surtur's gigantic sword pointed towards Yuan. You are qualified. You have the potential to climb the high tower, become a ranker, and become a ruler of the tower. But why are you here? Did you come in place of your comrade who was eliminated? Didn't I tell you before? Yuan flicked his ear as if he was annoyed. I'm going to hunt you. You have come to hunt me. Surtur burst out laughing. Ha ha, ha 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 ha, yes, that is true. Then I shall take you on. The gigantic sword rose into the sky. Yuan lifted his head and looked at Surtur's sword. The sword, which was made of demonic flames, blazed fiercely as if it would burn everything in the world. This is the end. Yu-Wan gritted his teeth and raised his shield. The fire energy that had built up inside his body was already sufficient. This annoying process was also coming to an end. Work. With a thud, Surtra's sword fell. Crack, screech. The cracks that had formed on the magic nullification shield rapidly spread. The next moment, crack, the shield shattered, and Surtra's flaming sword struck Yuan's body. Qua, Yuan's body was slammed into the ground. He barely managed to brace himself and endure it, but in the end, the ground couldn't withstand it. Before long, the ground beneath his feet sank, unable to withstand the intense heat. Boom! A giant crater was formed in the middle of the bustling street. Yu-Wan and the heavenly demon, Sun Wukong, were not on good terms. Sun Wukong, with his belligerent personality, always wanted to fight Yu-Wan. The reason was simple, because it was fun. Yu-Wan found Sun Wukong annoying. He would always rush in, trying to pick a fight, but Yu-Wan wasn't the type to enjoy fighting that much. Even so, Sun Wukong was a pretty good opponent for Yu-Wan. When it came to fighting, Sun Wukong had a natural talent, and he shared quite a lot of his experience and techniques with Yu-Wan. Perhaps it would be more accurate to call him a teacher rather than a friend. And among his teachings was this. This eye, yeah, that's why you can't win. Your sensory field is also pretty damn good. It's nothing compared to your eye. Yu-Wan lost to Sun Wukong every time. In the hundreds of fights they had, Yu-Wan had only won against Sun Wukong a handful of times. There were several reasons for this. The heavenly demon's divine artifact, the Ruyi Jingu Bang, which could extend infinitely. The somersault cloud, the first cloud known to have reached the end of the universe with its blinding speed. His limitless magic power, which he had gained after consuming all of the flat peach in the flat peach garden, a heavenly treasure. But when facing Sun Wukong, those weren't the most troublesome things to deal with. It was the heavenly demon's eye, the eyes of fire and gold. How did you get this? That was why Yu-Wan asked. If he were to lose the war and travel back in time using the hourglass, he needed to know how Sun Wukong had gotten his hands on that eye. I got it in a rather unusual way. Do you remember the tutorial? Which one? The third one. I remember it. I failed that one. It was an unexpected statement. Sun Wukong, of all people. In battle, Son Goku had an inborn talent. I couldn't believe that he failed the tutorial just because he couldn't collect 50 drops of essence. Well, there were various reasons, but that's not important. What's important is what happened next. What happened next? Do you know what the destruction was that came to the tutorial area? I had no idea. Probably no one did. No one here had failed the third tutorial, and even if they had, failing a tutorial meant death. This was an exciting story. As if to tell him to hurry up and tell him, Yu-Wan looked at Son Goku's eyes, not saying anything. Son Goku smiled broadly, as if enjoying the conversation, and continued speaking. Listen carefully. This eye, you see. The ground, crushed by the flames of the sword, sank down. Surtur looked down at the pit. Crackle, roar, the pit that had collapsed under the flaming sword was now blazing with bright red flames. These flames would never go out unless his power ran out. Even if he was wearing good items, he would have died or been badly injured. That's strange. Just now, Yu-Wan's actions felt more like he was deliberately taking the attack rather than blocking it. But he took the flames head on. Why on earth? Surtur looked at the bottom of the pit with a question in his mind. That moment, roar, in the pit blazing with bright red flames. Thud, from it, Yu-Wan, his body pitch black, slowly walked out. I thought I was going to die from the heat. Spitting out the flames that had built up in his body, Yu-Wan looked at Surtur unsteadily. At that moment, Surtur's eyes widened as they met Yu-Wan's. Your eyes, crackle, crimson red pupils, eyes that could see and pierce through all things. The first of the heavenly eyes of the fiery golden eyes. Great God, Lord of the heavenly river. Hidden peace conditions have been met. Monkey's eyes, is changing. Fiery eyes has been acquired. Thank you, Surtur. The power of that god now dwelled in Yu-Wan's eyes. Now let's begin. Chapter 18. As Yu-Wan reached out, the empty space rippled. Warwick, the world seen through his blood-red eyes was completely new. It felt like his senses were expanding, like a heated furnace, his body's senses were becoming hotter, and like he was in the middle of a battle that was just about to reach its peak. This is Fire Eye. There were 3 stages to the Fire Eye golden pupil. The first was the monkey's eye, that Son Goku, the monkey from the Flower Fruit Mountain, had. And the second was the Fire Eye, the eye that swallowed the breath of a dragon. There was only one condition for awakening the fire eye. To swallow the flames of the devil along with the hidden piece of the tutorial and instill it into the eye. I never thought that idiot would become someone I'd respect. The flames of Surtur were indeed hot. It wasn't just hot. Yuan felt his entire body burning away, and he felt every inch of his skin burning without any filter. It was a pain that a person with low concentration and weak willpower would probably go crazy from. Even with the clothes of a fire mage, it was this painful for him. But Son Goku, he really is a brute. He had withstood Surtur without any special items until he had acquired the fire eye. Before he had gained the power of immortality, he had a body that was different from others since birth, and it seemed like that was true. Fire eye, hash rank, A, hash proficiency, 12.14%. Hash the eye of a monkey that has been assimilated with the flames of the devil. It can distinguish between good and evil, truth and falsehood, and has a strong resistance to fire. Hash strong resistance to fire. Hash enhanced senses. Hash predicts battles. An A-rank skill. It was lacking when compared to the administrator's ability, Lord of Mana, but an S-rank skill wasn't something that could be easily obtained in the tutorial in the first place. An A-rank skill was a rare skill that even some rankers wouldn't have. Moreover, its proficiency was over 10%. Considering how difficult it was to increase the proficiency of a high-rank skill, a proficiency of over 10% was practically fraudulent. It's a good thing I raised its proficiency beforehand. The fire eye was a skill that the monkey's eye had evolved into because of the hidden piece. Naturally, the evolved form of a skill was affected by the skill that came before it. The monkey's eye, an F-rank skill, wasn't that difficult to increase in proficiency. Moreover, after Yuan had acquired the skill, he had spent almost all of his time with the monkey's eye activated. Since it was a low-rank skill, it didn't consume much mana, so he planned to increase its proficiency as much as possible during the time he had. Shall we begin? The corners of Surtur's lips curled up. He had been surprised when he first saw Yuan's eyes as he walked out of the fire pit, but that was only for a moment. The burns on Yuan's body and the heat that had built up in his body still hadn't disappeared. What do you think you're going to begin with that body? That was funny. He was still the son of the giant Surtur and the devil species that ruled the tower. Even though his strength had weakened because of the restrictions of the tutorial, Surtur couldn't help but find Yuan, who was already badly injured, laughable. Like this, that is. Wang, Wang, understood. Yuan's outstretched hand wavered in the air. Intermediate familiar inventory. Yuan reached into it and took out a weapon and a pill in each hand. That's. Surtur narrowed his eyes as he looked at the sword in Yuan's hand. A pure white blade and handle. The sword, with its simple shape and unusual color, emitted a bone-chilling cold. Check, JJEOK. SS's. The cold energy of the jade steel sword traveled through Yuan's hand and into his body. The cold energy cooled Yuan's body, which had been engulfed in Surtur's fire. Then, the internal energy and cold energy met and began to offset each other. That wasn't all he had prepared. Gulp. Yuan swallowed 2 pills in his hand, ice crystal. Then, ice crystal has been consumed. Ice crystal has been consumed. Body temperature is gradually decreasing. Status effect. Burn is relieved. Cold attribute is added to magical energy. The hot heat that had covered his body and the burns that had been piercing his skin disappeared. Instead, a cold chill permeated Yuan's body. Hoo-hoo. Cold air came out of his breath. The surroundings were covered with flames, but he didn't feel hot. 2 ice crystals, and thanks to the jade steel sword in his hand. It's rather chilly. Ice crystal and jade steel sword had an energy that was completely opposite to fire. In particular, the jade steel sword, a weapon made by refining giant ice, was a weapon with extreme cold energy. The jade steel sword was sharper and had stronger cold energy than any other steel, but it froze the user. That's why Surtur flinched at the energy of the jade steel sword. He knew it too, that this sword and the energy he felt from Yuan were the opposite of him. It's worth a try. Low-level demon Surtur. Now that he had gained the fire eye, it was time to hunt him. Thud. Yuan's foot hit the ground. Surtur's sword slashed at Yuan. Wah-ahk. A huge flame engulfed Yuan. Yuan didn't dodge. Instead of dodging, he swung his sword at the flame. Clothing of fire magic. Resists Surtur's extinction. Clothing of fire magic. Gains additional magical resistance to flame attribute attacks. Fire eye. Resists Surtur's extinction. Fire eye. Absorbs Surtur's extinction. It was a blow that had almost brought him to the brink of death just a moment ago, even with the shield of magic nullification in front of him. However, there was a big difference between then and now, even though the time difference was short. Body temperature is rapidly decreasing. Status effect. Resists burn. Clothing of fire magic, fire eye, and ice crystal and jade steel sword. With the power of all sorts of skills and items, Yuan broke through Surtur's flames. Kwaak. The flames were cut and a path was created. The moment Yuan's body, which had jumped high, reached Surtur's waist. Kwaak. The waist of Surtur, who was armed with an armor of fire, was cut. Kuak. Surtur screamed. Surtur screamed, quite neatly, too. The reason this outcome was possible was twofold. The jade steel sword and the power of frozen essence. Ow. The jade steel sword's cutting power was truly amazing. Hot blood spurted out of Surtur's severed waistline. The jade steel sword was a weapon that possessed powerful cold and cutting power, even though it afflicted its user with extreme cold. Goo. Surtur's body turned black with rage. At the same time, crimson flames rose above Surtur's hands. Warurur. Black-tinged flames. No matter how you looked at it, they were dangerous. Dodge it. Within his vision, which had turned red with the power of the fire eye. A single trajectory was drawn in Yuan's vision. He felt it instinctively. He had to move there. One of the powers of the fire eye. Battle prediction. Waruruk. Bang, pop, pop. Surtur's black flames burned all around. The crimson flames were different from the other flames that had swept the ground until now. Instead of burning the ground or collapsing the surface with heat, the ground itself completely melted away. The power of a demon. It was the result of using part of the fires of hell. Fortunately, he was able to avoid being hit by the crimson flames, but the aftereffects were considerable. He barely managed to cut away the heat using the jade steel sword, but it was no use. He was still not strong enough to clash with Surtur head-on. Two aren't enough. Yuan took 2 more frozen essences from his inventory. Your body temperature is dropping rapidly. Abnormal status. Frostbite is starting. Separate from his resistance to flames, the cold of the jade steel sword continued to eat away at Yuan's body. This was the result. The outside of his skin was warm, but the inside of his body was already filled with a cold chill. To suffer from both burns and frostbite at the same time. He had experienced all sorts of things in the tower for a long time, but this was also a first for him. I can't hold out for long. The cold attribute was a natural enemy to Surtur, the giant of flames. The problem was that Yuan was not yet a vessel capable of withstanding this much cold. I'll finish it quickly. With this much cold, he could withstand even a large fire. Yuan exhaled deeply and barely managed to spit out the cold chill that had risen to his throat. His chest grew colder as his heart froze. It was then that Surtur's sword stretched out. Qua. Crimson flames split the earth. Yuan twisted his body to avoid the sword. Avoiding the ground that had melted and cracked from the flames, Yuan charged towards Surtur. Shuak. The jade steel sword flew towards Surtur's leg. Time was running out. There was no longer any reason to conserve mana. Mana sword. Yuing. A mana sword that rose more than a foot. Yuan swung the jade steel sword with all his might towards Surtur's leg. Quat. Surtur's leg was cut off. Surtur's leg was cut cleanly. Kuat. Surtur screamed. Thud. Surtur, whose ankles had been cut, lost his balance and fell to his knees. Surtur hurriedly raised his head to find Yuan. And that moment. Wung. A ball of magic made of pure white cold energy rose before Surtur's eyes, who had raised his head. Mana gun. Quat. Check. GGGG. Mana gun, which had absorbed the power of ice, poured down on Surtur's face. Surtur's head, made of hellfire, froze in an instant. Surtur's body lost its balance and slowly tilted to the side. But it was just a momentary. Waruk. Flames rose again from Surtur's head. No matter how much mana gun contained the power of ice, which was the opposite of fire, the gap in power between Surtur and Yuan was too great. But it was just a moment. If could just break his balance for a moment, that would be enough. I can see it. The view seen through the fire eyes. The world seemed to slow down by a beat. Surtur's tilted body was certainly huge, but it wasn't so big that he couldn't climb it. Yuan climbed onto Surtur's body, who had fallen to his knees. Surtur shook his head, realizing that Yuan had climbed onto the back of his neck. This bastard. Abrat who hasn't even climbed the tower. How dare you? Warururur. Flames erupted from Surtur's body. A faint black color, the symbol of the hellfire, mixed in, the annihilation fire that would destroy the tutorial area. Yuan had not yet reached the level where he could properly handle the fire. Attribute. Cold, resists, Surtur's annihilation fire. Clothes of flame magic, resists, Surtra's annihilation fire. Fire eyes resists, Surtra's annihilation fire. Fire eyes absorbs, Surtra's annihilation fire. Resistance to, Surtra's annihilation fire, failed. Abnormal status, burn rises to stage 2. Abnormal status, burn rises to stage 3. Fire resistance increases by 1. Various means of countering Surtra's symbol, fire. But despite all the meanings that had been prepared, Yuan's body was already burning black. That's what it was. The destruction of the 3RD tutorial. The gap in power between Surtra and Yuan. But however, even so, Yuan finally stood on top of Surtra's head. Lower demon Surtra, Theonlian versus scale he had, I'm Theonuhos winning. Yuan held the ice iron sword in reverse. Surtra shouted as he realized that Yuan had climbed on top of his head. Sleep, Puak. The cold energy of the ice iron sword that pierced his head seeped into Surtra's mind. Check, Jijijek, Chang, the ice iron sword, made of ice crystals, shattered, and the annihilation fire attached to Surtra's body disappeared. Immediately after, you have defeated the destruction of the tutorial. You have achieved an unbelievable achievement. The reward calculation is delayed due to the achievement of an impossible achievement. Level up, level. Amidst his fading consciousness, sweet messages rang in Yuan's head one after another. Chapter 19. After quite some time had passed, Wu Jin, who had collapsed on the ground, regained consciousness. How many hours had passed? His body was still in shambles. He had barely regained consciousness and the burns had not yet healed, so it seemed that not much time had passed. His body throbbed from the burns. That wasn't all. The chills are still here. The problem was not the burns. The cold that lingered in his body was due to the fact that he had wielded the ice jade iron sword and swallowed 4 ice crystals. His mouth was parched, and his insides still felt frozen. His body was not responding. I almost died. That was the first thought that came to his mind when he woke up. He had really been on the verge of death. If I had been a little late, it could have been dangerous. When Wu Jin got up, he saw the remains of the skulls scattered around him and Surtra's corpse. It seemed that the skulls had died along with Surtra. He seemed to have fallen from Surtra's head as he lost consciousness. I really got it. In any case, he had obtained the fire seed. It was a goal that he had to achieve in the tutorial. The midpoint on the way to the fire seed altar. However, the tutorial was not over yet. This is not the end. He suddenly laughed out loud. You guys, this path is tough. Wu Jin muttered to himself, thinking of his companions who had joined together to send him back to the past. This was only tutorial 3. There was still a long way to go. Thud, Wu Jin walked up to Surtra's corpse. Surtra's corpse, with its flames extinguished, was not impressive. It was the corpse of an ordinary giant. However, it was not just a corpse. The corpses of demons are all byproducts of items. Surtra was a lower-level demon, but he was the son of Surtur. A demon was a high-ranking being that could only be found on the upper floors of the tower. Moreover, Surtra, who was born as the son of Surtur and became a demon, was quite special among them. Clank, thud, Wu Jin searched Surtra's corpse. He tore out the bones in his chest and ripped open his chest, revealing an empty space inside. No, just one. There it is. He saw a bright red, spherical orb. It was definitely located in the heart, but it looked more like a jewel than a heart. That was Surtra's heart and the source of his power. Swish, Wu Jin took out Surtra's heart and held it in his hand. He felt a hot heat. Giant's heart, classification, elixir. This is the heart of the demon giant Surtra. Surtra, a giant born in the land of fire, used this heart to emit the power of a giant and the energy of fire. Contains a considerable amount of mana. Contains the power of a giant. The red jewel was an elixir, called Giant's Heart. I want to take it right away, but Wu Jin checked his own body condition. It's difficult now. The Giant's Heart was quite a dangerous elixir. Not only did it contain a considerable amount of mana, but it was also an elixir that changed the user's own constitution, so it required a lot of stamina to take it and receive its power. Wu Jin's body was in shambles from his fight with Surtra. Furthermore, the cold from the ice crystals and the ice jade iron sword remained in his body, so there was a high possibility that the fire energy contained in the elixir would be diluted. Are you done with what you need to do? Wu Jin turned around at the voice behind him. Then he put the Giant's Heart in his inventory and answered. I'm done now. The administrator put his hand on his forehead. It was because what he had been expecting had finally come. Let's start the settlement. Because of you, I got an earful from the other guys. But now, it's really. The administrator shook his head. The deep sigh seemed to indicate that he had a splitting headache. The balance of this tutorial is completely ruined. He said that, but the administrator could not touch Wu Jin. Administrators were beings who strictly followed the laws of the tower. As long as Wu Jin continued to act and move within the laws of the tower, this absurd monopoly would continue. For now, you guys will go to the last area. The fourth tutorial is already underway, and it's almost over. It's over. It seemed like he had been unconscious for quite a while. The theme of the fourth tutorial was a defense that lasted for a day. He knew that he wouldn't be able to join the fourth tutorial halfway through, but it was progressing faster than expected. How much time is left? About 4 hours left. You can wait until then. 4 hours. The fifth tutorial was the last gate to enter the tower. Naturally, the difficulty was the highest, and the time spent there was the longest. 4 hours. Yuan nodded. That's enough time. I'm sure it is. Have the rewards been decided? It seemed like it took quite a while. I thought long and hard about what to give you. This time, I had to discuss it with the others. The others that the administrator was talking about were probably the administrators of the other floors. A decision so difficult that a single floor's administrator couldn't decide on a test given by the tower. Well, it made sense. Even though Surtur had been weakened by the tower's intervention, a newbie, who hadn't even finished the tutorial had taken down Surtur. Surtur was originally meant to destroy the tutorial area, not to be hunted. 10,000 points have been acquired. You have acquired the skill, Star of Heavenly Death. All stats have increased by 3. Yuan made a curious expression. It was because of the skill he had unintentionally acquired. Star of Heavenly Death, a star that kills the heavens. It was a truly magnificent name. Perhaps it was only natural for a skill with such a grand name to have been acquired after killing Surtur, the destroyer of the tutorial. However, there was no skill named Star of Heavenly Death in Yuan's memory. A skill that I don't know. He thought he knew all the higher level skills. Well, it doesn't matter. The tower never betrays effort and action. When a difficult test is perfectly overcome, the tower provides a suitable reward. It was a truth that would never change, even in the distant future that Yuan knew. I wonder what to expect. Yuan quickly checked the skill. Star of Heavenly Death. Hashtag rank. A+. Hashtag completion rate. 0.00%. Hashtag one who has the fate and talent to kill the heavens. Your fate and worth will change depending on the weight of the lives you kill in the future. Hashtag stats increase depending on the targets and number of kills. Hashtag all stats increase by 3. An A+ rank skill. It was half a rank higher than Yuan, and naturally, it wasn't a skill that could be acquired in the tutorial area. It meant that killing Surtur and preventing the destruction was that difficult of a test. He was satisfied with the rank itself. The effect itself wasn't that great. However, the effect of increasing all stats was definitely appealing. It's better than a mediocre skill. A skill wasn't necessarily good just because it had a high rank. Depending on an individual's combat style, a lower ranked skill could be more efficient than a higher ranked skill. Considering that, a skill that increased stat points was a skill that would suit anyone well. Furthermore, that wasn't all that was noteworthy. Completion rate. Yuan focused on the completion rate that had taken the place of proficiency. Does it mean that it's not a fully completed skill yet? There were occasional items like that. Growth-type items that grew with the user over time. However, it was the first time even Yuan had heard of a growth-type skill that had a completion rate instead of a proficiency. Either way, there's no better skill to fill in my lacking stats. The reward of 10,000 points didn't catch his eye. All stats increased by 3 points from the start. Naturally, it included his mana. A total of 15 stats. It was a much bigger change than if his level had increased by 5. Leveling up became harder as he leveled up, but the stats increased by acquiring Star of Heavenly Death were treated separately from his level. It wasn't a bad reward at all. Do you need anything else? Yuan nodded at the administrator's question. Give me one small recovery pill. You buy that precious thing well. The administrator grumbled and handed Yuan a round red pill. 10,000 points consumed. Acquired. Small recovery pill. Yuan received the red pill. The effect itself was much better than the great recovery pill, but it wasn't something that could be obtained right now. Even if he tried to buy it from the shop, it was an item worth several million points, so it was impossible to think about it. I had no choice but to be satisfied with this for now. Anything else? No. Then wait here for a bit. Eat that and rest. The administrator disappeared with those words. The time given was 4 hours. During that time, he had to recover his injuries and stamina and prepare for the 5th tutorial. The 5th tutorial is a race against time. Crunch. Yu-won put the small recovery pill in his mouth and chewed it. It tasted like all the bitter herbs in the world had been ground together. I delayed too much time while I was unconscious. I should have taken Surtur's heart too. Gulp. Yu-won swallowed the small recovery pill and sat down. A pleasant feeling of coolness spread through his body. He closed his eyes and absorbed the energy of the small recovery pill into his heart. Magic power increased by 1. Stamina increased by 1. Body wounds and stamina recover quickly. The small recovery pill was originally a fairly precious elixir in a world outside the tower. It was an item that increased magic power and stamina, and it was also an item that gave quite a lot of stats when taken for the first time. 2 stats. Is this the limit for now? It might be different if it was a great recovery pill, but it was difficult to expect more stat points from a small recovery pill. If he had taken the small recovery pill at a lower level, he might have been able to get 1 or 2 more additional stats. He quickly put away his regrets. Anyway, there were plenty of ways to collect points in the future, and 2 stats were quite a good result at his current level. Moreover, the original purpose of taking the small recovery pill was to quickly recover from the wounds he had suffered in the battle with Surtur. Originally, recovering from wounds with a small recovery pill was something that only high rankers would do. I can't help it for now. Time passed quickly. Was it because of the effect of the small recovery pill? His battered body recovered quickly. Time passed. Yu-won, who had been waiting for the 4th tutorial to end, opened his closed eyes. He felt it instinctively. The will of the tower was calling him. It's the beginning. Yu-won got up from his seat. That moment, wung, the atmosphere surrounding his body vibrated. His body floated up, and his vision blurred. The sky and the earth, where the colors of various paints were mixed, became black. Yu-won's vision, which had been floating alone and separate from the world, changed. A disconnect from the world. And a connection to another world. The world that had turned black and merged together split apart, and another world of a completely different color appeared. The flow of air, which had been hot from the fight with Surtur, turned cold. The sky was clear, and there was a salty sea smell. A vast forest spread out before his eyes. A considerable number of people appeared around him. What is this place? Is this the 5th tutorial? There are so many people. How big is this place? The number of people seemed to be over 100. Some considered the number to be large and were wary of each other. Among the tutorials he had experienced so far, there had been missions where they had to attack each other. But they still didn't know how different this last tutorial was from the tutorials they had experienced so far. How small a world they had been living in. A place where the tutorial participants of various worlds gather for the first time. The starting point where they gathered in the vast tower world for the first time from various vast world lines. The tower called the end of this tutorial like this. The last tutorial will begin. The gathered world. Chapter 20. People were in an uproar at the mention of the final tutorial. Final. It's the final. Does that mean it's over now? No way. It says, tutorial. Quiet down, will you? Some people frowned at the commotion around them. The message continued. The island of Baraganda is slowly sinking into the sea. There is only one condition to escape the island and prove your worth. Hunt the boss at the top of the island. Points will be awarded based on your contribution to hunting the boss. The final reward will be determined based on the score and the time it takes to clear the boss. The time limit is 30 days. The island will sink completely if the time limit is exceeded. Time limit. 720, 000. What? A month? Was it because the time limit was longer than expected? Voices of surprise erupted. Up until now, the tutorial time had been as short as an hour or as long as 3 days, but now it had suddenly increased. That didn't mean that the place turned into chaos. On the contrary, there were many who were relieved. There was no need to fight with the people around them with swords right now. Besides, the more time they had to achieve a goal, the better. Of course, some of them noticed. Unlike the relieved people, Yuan found a few people who were looking grim. Why was this time given? A month. It was more than enough time to feel at ease. But of course, this time was not given for free. It meant that they had to become stronger during that time and achieve their goals. But they were given a whole month to kill just one boss. It was hard to imagine how powerful the boss would be. But maybe that's why they made it to the final tutorial. The participants started to move around, one by one. And it always started with, "Everyone, did you hear? We met like this for a reason, so how about we form a team?" It started with forming a group. Should we? I'm okay with it. If we do this, we can all share the same name. I don't refuse. A solemn voice spread through the hall. Eyes gathered in one place. Yuan was among those gazes. That guy was here too. Blonde hair and golden eyes. A man wrapped in white cloth that didn't match the chaotic tutorial. Hargan. He looked around the room with an arrogant expression. Who dares to be my comrade? A comrade is someone I can trust with my back and my side. So I will choose my comrade. Hargan laughed at the gazes that gathered on him. It seems that none of you are qualified to be my comrade. What did you say? What? This arrogant. The moment the man next to him took a step towards Hargan. Flash. Kwang. Ak. Kuk. Yellow lightning exploded, and the bodies of those around Hargan flew into the air. See, crazy. What is this? A skill. It was a powerful electric shock. It was so powerful that it could kill everything within a 5-meter radius. Hargan had turned nearly 100 participants into his enemies in an instant, but he still looked relaxed. They're just weaklings. Crack, crackle. A massive concentration of mana crackled around Hargan as electricity surged. It was hard to find someone with that much mana even in the lower floors of the tower. Of course, he wasn't an ordinary tutorial participant. He calls himself the successor of Olympus. A descendant of Zeus. He was a being of a different level than the mere participants of the tutorial. Is that the power of a high-ranking pureblood? Pureblood. It referred to those who were born and raised in the tower, and who were chosen to climb the tower. They had experienced the mysteries of the tower from the moment they were born. Naturally, they had a different level of power than the other participants who had just been chosen by the tower and started the tutorial. A fair game only goes this far. Some might say otherwise, but the tutorial was quite fair. Although some may say otherwise, the tutorial was quite fair. From time to time, monsters like mountain beasts would appear and charge at him, but Harkin easily blew them up and continued to chase after Yuan. Although their stats were all different, at least they had all lived in similar environments in the same world. However, this last tutorial, and furthermore, the tower, was different. Some experienced the mysteries of the tower in advance as pure bloods, and some entered the tower with abilities akin to magic that ordinary humans could not possess. And among them, Harkin was a being who had inherited the power of Olympus. He was bound to have the most outstanding strength among the pure bloods. To be at that level at the start of the 5th tutorial. Yuan nodded his head. He's definitely someone to keep an eye on. Harkin was a participant who had caught the attention of the tower in the tutorial round that Yuan had experienced. A pure blood of Olympus and a descendant of Zeus, he was known to have inherited the power of thunder. In fact, when he had finished the tutorial, many guilds in the tower had paid attention to how quickly he would become a ranker. In fact, he was the one who contributed the most to taking down the boss of the last round. Thinking back to the old days, Yuan soon lost interest in Harkin. He had no intention of getting too involved with him anyway. Harkin, who had been threatening the surroundings with his lightning powers, discovered Yuan. While everyone else was stopped, looking at Harkin, Yuan was walking off somewhere on his own. Hey, you over there! Harkin shouted at Yuan. Yuan, who had been walking, turned his head. Before he knew it, Harkin had walked up to him and was standing in front of Yuan. Are you talking to me? What are you? What? Those clothes. Aren't those the clothes of a flame artist? Apparently, Harkin, who had been living in the tower for a long time, knew about the clothes of a flame artist. Of course, Olympus was a group where all sorts of rankers gathered. Harkin might have seen the clothes of a flame artist there. Yuan thought it was annoying and answered. Yes. How did you get them? They're not an item you can get in the tutorial. I bought them. With points. You bought them. Harkin made a curious expression at the simple and obvious answer. He looked like he was wondering how much they cost that he had bought them with points. Of course, the items that Harkin was wearing were not something that an ordinary participant would have. It's not comparable to the clothes of a flame artist, though. Harkin looked at Yuan with interest. It seemed that Yuan, who had the clothes of a flame artist, looked different from the other participants. What's your level? Isn't it rude to ask someone's level? Well, that's true, but have you already grasped that concept in the tutorial? Harkin scratched his head and nodded. Well, I understand. I won't ask about that anymore. So, do you want to team up with me? It seemed that he had become interested in Yuan because of the clothes of a flame artist. Harkin's expression was like that of someone waiting for a set answer. Perhaps he thought that Yuan would naturally accept his offer since he had just shown off his skills. In fact, if it were a pure blood who knew Harkin, they might have accepted this offer. Up until recently, he had not climbed the tower and had not received the blessing of the system, but he was a pure blood of Olympus. The seeds of his innate talent were different. However, no, thanks for the offer. Of course, it was an offer that Yuan was not very interested in. Quote. Harkin blinked his eyes, dumbfounded for a moment. He never thought that Yuan would refuse his offer, even after he had shown off his skills. Yuan walked past Harkin as he answered. Is it because he doesn't know who I am? Harkin turned his head and looked back at Yuan. Wait a minute, But Yuan was already far away. What the? Harkin, who felt his pride hurt because he had been ignored, frowned and put strength into his thighs. Kurur, the power of thunder was imbued into his legs. He glared and began to run after Yuan. Bang, stop right there. Harkin ran after Yuan for a while. How far had he run through the forest? Halfway there, a monster dashed out like a wild beast, but Harkin killed it in a single breath and continued to chase after Yuan. But, Huck, gasp, Harkin gave up on chasing after Yuan and stood to the side, catching his breath. The distance between them continued to grow, and Yuan was soon out of sight. What's so fast? He couldn't figure out what was going on. He was running at full speed, but he couldn't catch up. He didn't seem to be using any special skills to increase his movement speed. If he was, he would have sensed the flow of magic, and there was no way he wouldn't have known. That meant one thing. What the hell is his stat? Yuan was running solely on the power of his stats. Harkin let out a short laugh. Was that guy a pure blood too? But even so, he was faster than Harkin, a pure blood of Olympus. Who are the fast ones? From Elfland, a master of Murim, or perhaps, the bloodline of Hermes. Harkin shook his head as he pondered. He wouldn't be able to find the answer just by thinking about it alone. Anyway, one thing was for sure. I thought it would be boring. Kurur. Electricity began to flow around Harkin's wide-open mouth. He stared in the direction Yuan had disappeared, his golden eyes glinting. This is going to be fun. Did I lose him? Yuan stopped running when he realized Harkin was no longer chasing him from behind. It took him 5 minutes to lose him. Indeed, he deserved to brag about being the successor of Zeus. He's incredibly fast. The lightning he had shown to the other participants was fearsome, but his running speed was also extraordinary. He had just finished the 4th tutorial, and his physical abilities were at this level. Besides, as far as Yuan knew, his specialty was not speed, but brute force that used lightning, making him incredibly ignorant. Even if he was a pure blood, his strength was enough to overturn the ecosystem of the tutorial. Suddenly, the administrator's words came to mind. The balance of this tutorial is completely messed up. Apparently, he wasn't just talking about himself. Harkin, the pure blood of Olympus. Even if it was just him, he would disrupt the ecosystem of the tutorial, so what more when Yuan was also causing trouble? It's none of my business, though. Yuan found a cave in the forest. Inside the cave lived a monster with the head of a wolf, a gnoll. Dozens of gnolls. Yuan slaughtered them and took over the cave. You have killed a gnoll. The completion rate of 1000 slaughter has increased by 0.001%. You have killed a gnoll. The completion rate of 1000 slaughter. You have acquired 3p. The completion rate of 1000 slaughter increased slightly after killing a few gnolls. However, it was very minimal. Even after killing dozens of gnolls, the completion rate of 1000 slaughter had not increased by even 0.01%. To properly increase the completion rate, I'll have to hunt the ones in high places. But Yuan's purpose in finding this cave in the first place was not to hunt. Yuan sprinkled the odorless powder he had bought in advance in front of and inside the cave. It was to prevent other monsters from coming in after smelling it. This should do it. He had taken the summoning pill, and his body had recovered enough. Furthermore, the ice jade sword and the cold air of the ice field in his body had all disappeared. This was enough preparation. Yuan reached into his inventory. From it, Yuan took out a single red jewel. Heart of a giant, a reward he had received for catching Surtur along with 1000 slaughter. It was practically the most precious elixir that could be obtained within the tutorial. Listen carefully, Kim Yuan. Yuan took a deep breath and opened his mouth wide. Soon, the heart of a giant must be. Quack. Yuan chewed and swallowed the red jewel, the heart of a giant. Consumed before the end of the tutorial.